Welcome to The Big Picture, a show that takes a deep dive into the political landscape of not only America, but right here in our own backyard of Illinois.
It's showtime, folks.
The Big Picture is on WCPT 820. And now, here's your host, Edwin Eisendrath.
Hello, everybody. Happy Saturday. Illinois lost a wonderful resident this week. Kay Smith was our artist, laureate. She became, famous for painting all of our historical landmarks during the bicentennial. She put together a collection of artworks later that she thought told the story of America. She is a remarkable woman who deeply loved our country. She came from Vandalia, Illinois, moved up to Chicago when she was young. I was lucky enough to get to know her because I grew up with her fabulous daughter, Julia. And so my heart goes out to the family. And for those of you who don't know Kay Smith's work, look it up online. It's a pretty remarkable story of America. But I guess I should turn to other stories of America. My gosh, what did we expect when we elected a felon? I mean, I'm saying what I expected, but there are others who bought the canard that the system was rigged to go after an innocent man. Even for them, though, that lie has less and less convincing. I mean, even in the hermetically sealed MAGA ecosystem, reality is beginning to find a way in, no matter where you get your news. And it's hard not to notice the price of eggs or to worry about a measles outbreak, which is growing in Texas, or to have heard about the bird flu, which, is now into humans after going into cattle. And that's a little bit triggering because the last time Mr. Trump was in charge, he so bungled COVID that everyone in America knows somebody who died. And really, no matter where you get your news, were you thinking it was a good idea to spend American time and effort to, take over Gaza? To commit the U.S. to that kind of war crime? Please. The felon is in office, in part because right-wing liars spent billions, including, a whole lot of tax dollars that supported Jim Jordan's weaponization of government committee to lie that the government was weaponized against them. And I note that Jim Jordan, that committee no longer exists, of course, because it really just did its job, didn't it? And now the people are seeing that, those Republicans weren't saying that government was weaponized, and they weren't saying it shouldn't be. What they really were saying was they should be the ones doing it. And so they are. But here's the thing. Polling already shows Mr. Trump underwater. No new president has ever fallen so fast. Of course, going after the supposed misuse of government was only one of their lies. They also spent billions demonizing big cities, urban mayors, and black people. Well, guess what? Those two pillars of MAGA faith have now collided. And let me just point you to the direction of Mayor Eric Adams. I bet if you polled Republican counties across America what they thought of Mayor Adams, you would have been massively unpopular. Even Trump doesn't flip that switch in a day. And you know what? To dismiss Adams' criminal indictment for an obvious quid pro quo, it just makes those weaponization claims seem, like the lies they always were. And even longtime Republicans, people who clerked for Scalia and Roberts, people that Trump gave important jobs to, like leading the U.S. Attorney's Office in New York, they called out the Justice Department for its breach of law and resigned rather than carry it out. Bravo. Look, here in Chicago, where Rod Blagojevich tried to sell, I guess, a U.S. Senate seat, we know a thing or two about political crooks. And Mr. Trump, of course, he commuted Blagojevich's sentence earlier, but then he went further and pardoned him. In effect, Trump is saying, hey, you know what? If you're smart enough to sell a U.S. Senate seat, you're my kind of guy. And he's right. They are a whole lot alike, crooked to the core. Trump has ordered the government not to enforce the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, to disband the unit that enforced sanctions against Russian oligarchs. But hey, you know what? When the MAGA Congress didn't bat an eye when Trump put all those violent thugs who attacked our Capitol and injured police on January 6th, when he put those terrible people, dangerous people back on the street, why shouldn't he think he could get away with this too? Now Trump's considering disbanding the public integrity unit inside the Justice Department. And of course, that makes sense because public integrity isn't actually a concept he understands. This week, our president, for gosh sake, sold out Ukraine, rehabilitated Putin, destroyed the independence of the Justice Department, added 2 dangerous and ill-prepared and deeply unfit members to his cabinet. He allowed the creation of an independent entity led by Elon Musk to gain control over government functions. Oh, and by the way, he sent his vice president to Europe to interfere with an election in another country, to interfere with the election in Germany, and by the way, to interfere on the side of the neo-Nazi party. I knew Trump was lying when he put his hand on that Bible and swore an oath to protect the Constitution. And we are all living with these horrid consequences. Expect more bad every day. But also, every day, do at least one thing to help bring an end to this corrupt and evil regime. And we're going to talk about that throughout this show. Stay tuned.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Okay, everybody, I have an enormous treat for you. Catherine Heo is a climate scientist. She studied with the great Don Weebles, who many of you will remember because he came on this show last year. She went on to become one of the most prolific and impactful scholars of climate with, 125 peer-reviewed publications, books, lectures, a TED Talk that, I don't know, thousands and thousands and thousands, maybe millions have already seen. And of course, not surprisingly, she gets death threats because that's what happens when you stick your neck out to try and save the world. Catherine, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
No, I'm very excited you're here. I've watched your stuff. I think it's fabulous. And look, I guess we should start with this. I want to talk about environment and what we can do on climate. And I know that's what you're passionate about and what you study. But American politics has made everything a partisan thing. Everything. And, if the other guy believes it, it's a lie. That makes progressives skeptical of evangelicals, and it makes the MAGA world hostile to environmental science. You're getting it from every direction. How is it that you stay focused and able to do the work that you do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very accurate. So our world today is so politically polarized, and climate change has been at the top of the most politically polarized issues in the United States for over 15 years now. And very sadly, that is spreading around the world. Now, in every high-income country around the world, politics attenuates people's levels of concern about climate change, which makes no sense because a hurricane doesn't stop and knock on your door and say, excuse me, who did you vote for in the last election before it rips the roof off your house? And a wildfire doesn't look into the demographics of your neighborhood before it burns it down. But unfortunately, we've gotten to a place where very basic fact-based issues like the numbers a thermometer will give you have become identity markers for people, part of who they believe that they are. And so sadly, in this type of world, we can have people essentially saying, I don't believe in gravity. And when they step off the cliff, they're still going down, screaming that they don't believe in gravity, taking people with them. And it's really devastating to see these types of decisions being made, in some cases by people who do know better, but a lot of times in cases, people don't. So it's really a heartbreaking time to be studying what's happening to the world, not just what's happening, but how people are responding to it.
Yeah, we saw this in COVID where it was so political that people were literally dying. And their doctors are saying, look, you've got COVID. And they're saying, no, I don't. And the next thing you know, they were dead.
Oh, yeah. In fact, I unfortunately knew some people like that. And I could see it coming. So I was writing my book, Saving Us, right at the beginning of COVID. And Saving Us is all about how we can still have positive conversations about climate change in a highly polarized environment. And literally, as I was writing the book, I could see it happening to COVID in real time.
Mm-hmm. That's so interesting. I mean, I just think I'm frustrated that some of the biggest problems that we face are being, the credibility of people who talk about them is being attacked with ad hominems, and the facts are being polarized to the point where they stop being facts for people. And even death is not convincing them otherwise. And I don't know how we break through that, but that's something you've thought a lot about.
Mm-hmm. It is. And the first thing I say when I tell people that one of the most important things we can do about climate change is to just have a conversation about it, is people often assume that I mean they need to run out and immediately have an argument with, Uncle Joe or our neighbor or our colleague who is just completely sold out on how this isn't real. And there are about 10% of people in the U.S. who are what the Yale Program on Climate Change Communication calls dismissive. And I like that word dismissive because it's accurate and it's descriptive. A dismissive person would dismiss an angel from God with brand new tablets of stone saying global warming is real and split high letters of flame. So why would we think that we can convince them? I don't think we can. I think it takes an honest-to-God miracle to convince dismissive people, and I don't think there's any point wasting our time or breath arguing climate change with them. But here's what the data shows us. Even though that 10% is very loud, especially online and in the comment sections after articles, and most of us can name a dismissive person in our lives, a relative, a neighbor, somebody we've known for a long time, they're only 10% of the population. Only 10%. In the United States.
That's so interesting. And that's probably true for all these other issues, too.
Exactly. In the U.S., 2/3 of people are worried about climate change, but most of them don't know what to do, and they don't understand why it affects them personally, so they do nothing. So when I say that it's important to have conversations, I personally think that 60% of people who are worried, but they don't understand why it matters, and they don't know what to do about it, and they aren't doing anything as a result, that's where we can have the most effective conversations.
Well, let me ask about a kind of effective conversation. I know a lot of young people, and some of them are actually my kids, and they say, okay, I read the news. We're blowing through the agreed upon 2-degree cap that the world said was going to be a disaster if we blow through. And they're terrified. And you see this disaster unfolding, but your scholarship gives you the kind of telescope so you can even see further into the consequences than the rest of us, right? This would keep almost everybody awake, I think. But so when you talk to young people who are absolutely terrified, and you have the perspective of seeing what is so terrifying coming, how do you calm them enough so that we can, respond rather than just react?
Mm-hmm. So you're right. This is exactly the research I do. I literally study what is going to happen in the future depending on the choices we make. And what I see in my science is crystal clear. Our future depends on our choices. So what we do today, and this is actually the conclusion of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report. They literally said every bit of warming matters, every action matters. Our choices do matter, and that is a very empowering message because often climate change is kind of presented as if you're like tied to the railroad tracks with the train bearing down on you and there's nothing you can do about it. But when we realize that we as individuals do have an important, a key and essential role to play in catalyzing societal change, and that role does not begin with changing our light bulbs or eating a plant-based meal or buying a plug-in car. It begins with having a conversation where we live, where we work, where we study, where we worship, about what we could do together to make a difference. That's how social change happened in the past. If you look at how women got the vote, how civil rights were enacted, it was individuals using their voices. That's our power.
Yeah, I was thinking about that with respect to smoking. I could not stop my dad from smoking no matter what I said. But we had a lot of conversations, and I had a lot of conversations about my dad's bad habits around my workplace. And then, you know what? Workplaces said, yeah, well, let's just, if you want to smoke, go outside. And then then people started to look at those smokers and go, really? And suddenly it was a lot less of it.
Yeah, exactly. The world does change, but it is not going to change if we don't feel, and this is, I think, what we're most lacking today, if we don't feel efficacy. So efficacy is a fancy social science word that means something very simple. It means, if I do something, do I think it will make a difference? And nowadays, the majority of people are worried about climate change, but they don't think anything they do will make a difference. And so that, again, is the most important conversation to have with people who are worried, but they don't think they can make a difference.
So on my political ears, that sounds the folks let me just take this out of the United States. The autocratic movements around the world tell their people, you cannot make a difference. I'm the one who makes a difference for you. And they want their people feeling helpless in many domains of their lives. And parts of corporate America have wanted us to feel helpless about some domains of our lives, and part of our government, particularly funded by fossil fuel folks, want us to feel helpless because then we don't do all the things you're talking about.
Exactly.
Okay, so efficacy is one very powerful idea, and it begins with don't be shy, talk about it. Don't be shy, talk about it, right?
Yes.
And not in an angry way, but in a different kind of way.
Right. And the best place to begin a conversation is not with what you disagree with people on, but what you agree with them on. And if you don't know what you agree with them on, then you need to get to know them a little bit better and figure out what makes them tick.
So, yeah, it's like you're reading the notes I have for our conversation right in front of me, because my next question goes like, I know you to be a stunning communicator, and your connection, when you connect to people on science, it's actually a vigorous assertion of shared values. You go right to values. And I think that's remarkably powerful.
Thank you. Well, I think it's the only way we can have positive, constructive conversations, because we make decisions based on our values all the time. But if the biggest issue we have with climate change is that people don't understand how climate change is affecting their values because they think of it as an environmental issue. And if they don't see themselves as an environmentalist, and many people don't, then they don't see what the connection is. And so that's why so much of the work I don't do a lot of environmental work. I do work, for example, I co-founded Science Moms, and it's all about how being a parent and caring about your child's future means you're the perfect person to care about climate change, whether you think you're an environmentalist or not. And so that's just one example of a great place to start the conversation.
Because we have enough time to do this, would you take a minute and talk about the science, and then both your academic work and then more a little bit about your non-academic work to help enlist all of us in the fight?
So my academic work focuses on what the future will look like depending on the choices we make today. And that is very dire work, as you can imagine, because climate is changing and humans are responsible and the impacts are very serious. But what I found very early on, as long ago as 20 years ago, when I was doing regional impact assessments for California or for Washington, D.C. or the city of Chicago, we found that there was a night and day difference between a future where we just sort of continue business as usual compared to a future where we take climate action seriously. A night and day difference. And the uncertainty in terms of where we end up in the future, it is not scientific. It's not uncertainty based on how clouds respond or, feedback systems and the feedbacks in the climate system. The uncertainty is entirely human. It's the choices we make. It is the choices we make for our energy and efficiency, how we manage and use our land, how we develop and maintain our infrastructure. All of it is in our hands. And a lot of it is not just in our hands at a national level. A lot of it is in our hands at the regional to local level. Cities have so much power to make really impactful decisions. And often in cities, they find that people can get together more because they have more in common. And it's less polarized when you're making a decision about your city where you live than it is making a decision about an entire country.
Well, talk about some of those decisions we can make in a city. And let's talk about Chicago's a fine example because I'm sitting here and you studied it and you made some recommendations. Talk about the kinds of things municipalities can and should do.
Mm-hmm. So obviously, the first thing that cities can do is they can help with climate mitigation. In other words, they can reduce their own use of coal and gas and oil, and they can encourage inhabitants to also reduce their use. So, for example, cities themselves can get their energy, their electricity that they use from clean energy sources, and not just Chicago, but the city of Dallas, where I live, Houston, many other cities around the world are already doing this. But they can also make it easier for people to make choices. Easier for people to choose clean energy, for people to take public transportation, make it easier for people to find places to plug in their car, make it easy for people to reduce food waste and compost and get rid of food waste in a way that doesn't produce heat-trapping gases. Address issues like people living in food deserts that don't have access to healthy food that's also better for you and lower carbon footprint, like fresh fruits and vegetables. There's so many things that cities can do. And then cities can also help to keep people safe as climate changes. And this was a big part of our study for Chicago because Chicago had two very serious heat waves in the 1990s. In 1995 and 1999. Yes, hundreds of people died.
Yes.
And so central to Chicago's climate action plan is helping to green the city. So because in lower income neighborhoods that have less green space, they can be up to 15 degrees Fahrenheit hotter during a heat wave than a high income neighborhood with more green area. Not to mention the fact that vegetation and nature filters air pollution, provides some place for water to go when it rains, improves our mental and physical health by being able to spend time outside in nature, and reduces the amount of energy that you need for cooling demand in the summer and during heat waves. So there's all kinds of things cities can do, and Chicago itself is doing, to bring nature into the city to help protect from heat and flood as climate continues to change, as well as reducing the impact of the city and its inhabitants themselves on the problem in the first place.
Yeah, that's very important. A number of the things that happened in the last administration, the Biden administration, were incentives for both localities, like cities, to make those decisions, but also for corporate America to make those decisions to incent all kinds of innovation in green energy. I fear that all of that is ground to a halt with a new federal reliance, a monopoly reliance on fossil fuels.
Well, it has not, because under the last Trump administration, and again under this one, there's an organization called We Are Still In. And it is an organization of states, cities, companies, tribal nations, universities, churches, and other groups that are still committed to meeting the Paris targets. And currently, We Are Still In, I think, represents over 2/3 of the U.S. economy and over 2/3 of emissions. So they're still doing it, but it's like they're doing it without the wind in their sails. So like you just said, the federal government often did not necessarily initiate the action, but it was able to support and enhance and encourage the action that people want to take. And now it's not. And now it's actually moving in the opposite direction.
I have evangelical relatives who have bought all of the politics that has gone with that lately. But on the environment, I've looked at, Genesis 2 that says he created Adam and put him in the garden, to till it and tend it, as a clear, like the very first interaction between our species and God is, would you please take care of this planet?
Yeah, I mean, that's
how
Genesis,
do we talk to
Genesis 1. Yes.
Yeah. All right. So I loved your Instagram post about the thing that you called the things people say about me. How important is, humor in this fight?
I think it is very important. So I have a series of videos that I do every once in a while on Instagram where I take the nasty comments I've gotten, set them to music with some illustrations. And part of that is just because you have to, you have to laugh so you don't cry. But interestingly, research has shown that comedy can be very effective, obviously, at talking about these sort of hot button issues and helping us sort of get past the doom that so often clouds our perspective, and even some of the denial that does as well. And so there's research specifically showing that climate comedy can be effective. And on Blue Sky, which is the new social media platform that's sort of like what Twitter used to be back in the day, on Blue Sky they have this really great function where you can create starter packs of accounts that you want to recommend. And so I have created a bunch of different starter packs on different climate-related topics, and I've created one on climate comedy. People or organizations who specifically do funny videos or stand-up comedy or other types of comedy about climate change. And some of them are even climate scientists themselves. And I find it very appealing because laughing is good for us. When we get too doomed and too overwhelmed, we just get paralyzed. And if we're paralyzed, we're not going to do anything. So getting together and having a laugh sometimes about the grimmest things can, I think, really be helpful and healthy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Well, let me ask you about a couple of grim things.
Sure.
Are you worried that important data sets that you use all the time? Now, I'm thinking about things like NASA's GISS data or NOAA's Climate at a Glance website, things like that. Are you worried they're going to disappear, that this Trump's government is going to unplug them, get rid of them?
Oh, it's already happening. That is already happening. There are already all kinds of environmental justice screening tools going offline, health data going offline, but people knew that was going to happen, and there are already a number of very well-organized initiatives, including one at Stanford, one at Harvard, a lot of ones at different NGOs, and including some internet archiving tools, too, that are working very hard to archive a lot of the websites and the data that are already being taken offline. And that alone, I mean, just, wherever people fall on the political spectrum, hiding data is just a huge red flag that people are not interested in facts and truth. If you're really interested in facts and truth, you could both look at the same data set and you can come to different conclusions, and that's very fair. People can argue to death whether carrots or sticks, whether a carbon tax or Inflation Reduction Act or, whatever their favorite climate policy is coming from the same data. But if you're actually going to hide data, that makes it very clear that you want to do things that are completely not supported by facts and data. And unfortunately, you can do that for a certain amount of time, but eventually, like I said, you could say gravity's not real, but eventually if you step off the cliff, you're still going to be going down.
Yeah, I guess I agree with all of that. I might add that in some cases the data is valuable, and I don't trust that it's not being sold and being used to make private fortunes out of public work. That's an era we're living in.
Yes, that's a different issue. The stuff that they're taking offline is stuff that's more related to making health decisions or making climate decisions or making decisions that help people. That's the type of data that's being taken offline.
Let's talk about sort of global politics. China is spending a fortune on green energy. India is industrializing and maybe will be the first country that actually gets there without doing it all in fossil fuels. But here we're sort of doubling down on it, right? What's the long-term consequences for the United States if we look backwards when everybody else is looking forwards?
Well, it's like you're investing in horses and buggies when Henry Ford has already built the first assembly line and is turning out Model T Fords. That's what the situation is like. You're right. China and India are doubling down on green energy. Last year, China installed more solar energy in 1 year than the U.S. has in its entire history. And the U.S. is basically trying to move backwards into the past when pretty much every other country in the world is moving forwards into the future. And that means it will be left behind.
And left behind, just so I'm clear about it, left behind, I mean, the environmental damage we do is shared with everybody in the world. So the left behind part isn't just left behind to face the ill effects of climate change. It's left behind in terms of our economy, our science, our ability to compete in the world of ideas. Is that what you mean?
Oh, yes, exactly. Like just not at the cutting edge anymore, not a leader. Yeah.
My personal conviction is that one side is entirely to blame for all of this. But that conviction doesn't lead to a remedy. What is the way that we can maybe it goes back to the kinds of conversations we have to have, but how do we I want to be true to myself when I want to point across the table and say, hey, look, you're responsible. You just want to hold on to your Exxon stock till we all die. But I know that finger pointing isn't going to help us. How do I handle my anger at the people who I think are causing this problem and turn it into something that will solve this problem?
Well, that's a great question because unfortunately, anger at the situation, at the decisions, and at some of the leaders making those decisions can certainly be constructive, but anger at individuals is not. It's not constructive. It's not going to help us. And when you look at the data on political polarization in the U.S., the political polarization has happened on both sides. So
on different issues, sure.
On different issues. But 20 years ago, the average Democrat was closer to the average Republican than they were to the tails of their own party. And now both parties have moved to the tails. And there's precious little space in the middle. And unfortunately, polarization means that if anybody violates your ideological 10 commandments, then they are attacked as a heretic with all of the force and venom, that you would accord to an enemy. And unfortunately, being a person of faith and a scientist, I tend to get things on both sides. I have personally witnessed this coming from both sides.
Yep.
And those personal attacks are not the answer, even though I certainly empathize with and certainly feel much of that myself at some times. And this is why, as a climate scientist, I never thought this would be at the forefront of my mind, but caring for our mental health is so important. Spending time doing the things we love in the places we love with the people we love, spending time outdoors, spending time doing things that are constructive rather than destructive. It is so important to actually be doing things that make us feel positive. In fact, I read a really good article the other day from a woman in the UK who was so distressed over climate change that she was seeing a therapist, and the therapist said, volunteer. Go out and volunteer and do something. And so she volunteered for a group that went to pick up garbage at a local park, and she said it changed her life because she was actually interacting with people in a positive way, making a difference, and it gave her the tools that she needed to move forward from a practical perspective in terms of how she viewed the larger issue, her own sense of efficacy, and channeling that anger and that rage into doing something productive, not stewing, not arguing with people online. That isn't productive because it doesn't actually make us feel better. It doesn't make the world better. Take that anger and do something with it that actually makes a difference.
Yeah, doing good is, it has so many benefits. Among them, it takes down the anger on all sides. It makes individuals feel, feeling is wrong. It demonstrates to individuals their own efficacy, which is what you were talking about earlier. It's not it's not fake, it's real. And it also gives people a sense that there actually is a future.
Exactly. Yes. And that's the biggest thing we're missing. People feel like there is not a future. And if there isn't a future, why do anything, right?
Yeah, right. We feel like we're in an end of days fight.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we're not.
Yeah.
I mean, even in the most pessimistic climate science that you have seen, I don't think we're in an end of days fight.
No. People say, well, doesn't this mean the end of, human extinction? And I said, no, I have not seen a single set of projections for human extinction in the next 100 years. The destruction of human society, widespread suffering, absolutely. Those cards are on the table. Extinction is not. And so when there are people who sadly have decided to give up, because there's great comfort actually in giving up, and then rather than, going out and spending the rest of their lives with their family and their dogs and doing good in the world, they decide to get on social media and try to convince other people to give up. And I say, get out of the way. If you're not going to make a difference, get out of the way, because only if we give up are we going to face the worst case scenario. The science is very clear that every little bit we do will make a difference. In Paris, the world came together and set a goal of 2 degrees Celsius, 1.5 degrees if possible. And that's talking about the increase in the temperature of the planet, which for the temperature of the planet, it's as stable as the human body. And so if the temperature of the planet goes up 3 degrees Fahrenheit, then that's as if our body temperature went up 3 degrees Fahrenheit. We're running a pretty substantial fever, over 100 degrees.
Yep.
So those numbers, they're not magic thresholds. So if we're at 1.49, it doesn't mean that everything's fine. And if we're at 1.51, it doesn't mean it's all over. We just set thresholds because as humans, if we need a goal, and we need typically put a number on the goal, how much money we're going to save, how much weight we're going to lose. And so that's where those came from. But here's the thing. If we didn't have those goals, before we set those goals 10 years ago, it was just 10 years ago we set those goals, the world was headed to a 4 to 5 degrees Celsius warming. That is a 7 to 9 degree Fahrenheit warming. Imagine if your body heated up by 7 to 9 degrees. That's what we were heading to by the end of the century, 10 years ago. And thanks to all of the policies and the clean energy initiatives enacted in the last 10 years, we're now headed to between 2.7 and 3.3. Now, that is still too high, but that is a lot better than 4 to 5. And that's just in 10 years.
I think that's very comforting. And for me, a different measure matters as well, and that's just the rate of change of climate. And because I hear people say, "Oh, well, climate was, it was hotter." I don't know, at the beginning of the planet's history, I guess. Or we've had ice ages. They're like, okay, but there were like 11 human beings on the planet at the time. But climate change has always been with us, but it's been so much slower that there's been time to adapt. And the speed of climate change scares me almost as much as the thermometer.
Well, you're totally right. It actually is the speed that is most concerning, because we humans have never seen climate changing this fast before, ever. It's never happened during human civilization on this planet. And as far back as we can go, if you look at the last period of most rapid warming 55 million years ago, well before humans, our best estimates as scientists is that warming was happening at 1/10 the speed of the warming today. Yeah. So if you are just thinking of plants and animals, yes, some plants and animals will survive. I think, cockroaches and possums can probably survive pretty much anything. But most plants and animals have never faced conditions where they had to change 10 times faster than the last period of most rapid change. And when the natural environment cannot change quickly to adapt to changing circumstances, that is when extinctions occur. And just to be very clear, nature doesn't need us. We humans are the ones who depend on nature for everything, for literally the air we breathe, the water we drink, the food we eat. Everything we have comes from nature. And so it isn't, people often say, oh, well, we have to choose between caring for the planet and caring for people. And I'm like, well, good luck caring for people if the planet is just, if there's no nature on the planet, we're gone. It really is about saving all of us together. And like you just said, the rate at which this change is happening is most concerning. People often say, well, hasn't it been warmer before? And I say, well, if you really want to be worried about what's happening today, talk to some paleoclimate scientists. Talk to some of the scientists who study what happened before. You will be even more worried when you understand how much smaller changes in the past led to massive, massive impacts on everything that was alive at the time. The past has huge warnings for us. And in fact, one of my colleagues, Michael Mann, has a excellent book on past climate changes and how those have impacted life on Earth. It's called Our Fragile Earth. No, Our Fragile Moment is the name of the book, and I highly recommend it if you want to understand the past history of this planet and what it tells us about today.
I'm writing that down, Our Fragile Moment. But, I mean, and in the past, animals faced with climate change could migrate to a place that had a more similar climate to the one that they're leaving. But migration of human beings is difficult enough, and of animals impossible, because we're in their way now. They cannot move. You can't. Elephants are not going to move to Europe. It's not possible.
Right. And even humans, for a long time it was very popular to talk about climate havens. So what types of place would still have water and a pleasant climate under climate change?
But it's a myth.
Yeah. Chicago, Toronto, where I'm from, Asheville, North Carolina.
Oops. Yeah.
So in Chicago, I led the climate impact assessment for Chicago back in 2008. And in 2011, the city of Chicago and Cook County was sued by Farmers Insurance because they said that the county and the city had failed to account for how climate change was affecting flood risk, and they were leading the insurance companies to pick up the tab. And unfortunately, they couldn't say that they didn't know, because they did. We'd done the impact assessment 3 years before. So that's Chicago. That's not even LA or California.
Well, I mean, if Lake Michigan rises, we're in a swamp. If Lake Michigan goes up a couple feet more, as it did a few years ago, came right to that threshold, and then we have a rainstorm, there's no place for the water to go.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And even if the lake level doesn't change, we are seeing significant increases in heavy rainfall in the Chicago and the Midwest area, especially in the spring. And you just get much more rain falling at one time. And so your existing storm sewers and water drainage systems can't really cope.
Nope. Everybody knows that. Yeah. There's a lot of digging out every year. Flooding. It's expensive. So, all right, let's just go back a little bit and talk about now the advice. We began with, what do you tell young people? So go out, talk to people, volunteer, do something positive. But let's be a little more specific about the consequences. I know that I eat a lot less meat than I used to. I want to say it's because I'm aware of the climate impacts, but it's probably just because I'm older. I certainly don't. I don't fly.
Multiple reasons. Yeah.
Right. I don't fly like I used to, but then I was consulting and flying all over the planet in an earlier part of my life. Now I don't do that very much. Food waste is really interesting, and I'd love you to talk about that, because I don't think people understand how food waste is contributing to this problem.
I agree.
How is it? Tell them.
So most people know, and if you don't know, let me be very clear, that what we eat does have a big impact on climate change. Specifically, large-scale industrial animal agriculture, especially beef, produces a lot of heat-trapping gas emissions just because cows burp a lot. They burp, and they burp methane, which is a very powerful heat-trapping gas. And so the lower down the food chain we eat, the less the greenhouse or the heat-trapping gas emissions associated with our diet. So chicken is better than beef. Fish is better than chicken. Plant-based meals like tofu and lentils and other plant-based proteins are better than fish. And even having one day a week where you try a new veggie recipe is a great idea. It can really help. But almost, and in some cases equally important, is the food we don't eat. The food that in North America and many other well-off countries just decays. And when it decays uneaten, it produces massive amounts of heat-trapping gases. In fact, if food waste were its own country, it would be the fourth biggest emitter of heat-trapping gases in the world. That's how much food waste we produce. And so when I learned that,
that's amazing.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
So South Korea has reduced their food waste by over 95%.
How?
And if they can do something like that, why can't we?
How?
They've done it. They've done it through multiple different ways. They have really good composting and food waste collection programs, but they also, because they're conscious of food waste, are very conscious of not generating it in the first place. There's a lot of ways that people are using, making groceries available when they're just at their sell-by date, making sure that people can buy. There's programs where you can buy so-called ugly fruits and vegetables that don't quite meet the pretty perfection, but they're still perfectly edible. They just might be a little misshapen or something like that. So instead of throwing them out, we should just be eating them. So for myself, I found this out about 10 years ago, and I realized that I was actively contributing to this because I had a giant freezer, and I would go grocery shopping maybe once every 2 weeks, and I'd come home with like 20 bags, and I would have a lot of stuff that wasn't fresh fruit and vegetables because, fresh fruit, fresh vegetables, and fish, which are all very low-carbon things to eat, you got to eat them fresh. Mostly.
Right.
And so I would have a lot of frozen food, prepared food, and we weren't eating as healthy as we could. And then stuff would go bad in the back of the fridge because it was always so full I couldn't even see what was in the back of the fridge. And we were wasting a lot of food. So I got rid of my freezer, and then I put my shopping bags in my car, and I picked a grocery store that was on the way home from university. So between my house and the university, I picked a grocery store, and I started shopping 2 or 3 times a week. But I would only walk out with 2 or 3 bags, which is very easy, and we would have so much more fresh food, and the fridge was half empty, and the freezer was gone, and we totally changed our eating habits. We cut our personal food waste probably at least by 2/3, and we started eating more lower carbon, fresher, more delicious, and more healthy meals, and we stopped wasting money. And it was just something so encouraging that I felt like I could do myself.
I got to say, I love talking to you. You make it sound, this is Tom Sawyer painting the fence. You make it sound like this is right. This is fun. Everybody grab a brush. We can all do this together. We can get it done. And, it's just amazing your ability to communicate our power to make a difference.
Thank you. And that's what we all can do. I really think we can because, scientists are the second most trusted and effective messengers to have these conversations, but people we know are number one. And so that is why every single week, usually on Saturdays, and it's coming up this afternoon, I have a newsletter every week called Talking Climate. And every single week, I share good news about climate solutions. I share not so good news about how climate change is affecting something we care about, like diabetes risk or chocolate or sporting events. And then I share something concrete that we can do to make a difference. And it's all with the goal of helping people have positive, constructive conversations that make us feel better afterwards than we did before. And this was last week. Somebody said something so nice to me. They said, "Your newsletter is the only news on climate that I can click to open without a bad feeling in the pit of my stomach. I'm actually excited to read what you have to say, and after I've read it, I feel full of good news that I can share with people around us."
Catherine, tell people how they can get your newsletter.
It is very easy. It's called Talking Climate. You can go to talkingclimate.ca, or you can go to my website, catherinehayho.com, or you can even follow Talking Climate on Instagram or Threads.
Yeah, I do. It's fabulous.
Thank you.
So I don't know. I'm just going to, while you were talking about food waste, I was desperately trying not to think about the millions of tons of food that USAID, when they pulled the plug, have left sitting to rot in ports around the world. I'm trying not to think about that.
Yeah.
Right? And to think about, that if 100 million of us in America do our job, might counteract that disaster.
Exactly. Because if we obsess with things we can't do anything about, it actually makes us feel even less efficacy than what we did. We have to, that prayer about, give me the wisdom to change the things I can. That's what we need to do. There are things that are within our control, and that is where we need to channel our energy and our emotions, including our anger, into making a difference where we can.
All right, everybody.
I'm telling myself that too.
For those of you who are listening, I hope you've enjoyed meeting Catherine Hayhoe. Catherine, I hope we will talk again. If you're listening, please sign up for Talking Climate. Read Saving Us. It's, it is not just, for those of you who are listening to the show because of the politics, what she's talking about will help you engage in that fight better too. I promise. I wish you all the best and love your research. And you will come back from time to time and update us on what you see going on.
I would love to. Thank you so much for having me.
You're the best. Thanks. All right, everybody, we're going to take a quick break. I know it's going to be hard to top Catherine Hayhoe for sure. Yasmin Rajdi of Swing Left is joining us when we come back.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
All right, everybody, welcome back. The fabulous, energetic, and profoundly effective leader of the North Carolina Democratic Party, Anderson Clayton, is back with us. Hello, Anderson.
Thank you, Edwin. So nice to see you or talk to you again, I guess.
Yep. Hey, I know we haven't talked on the air in a while, like probably not since the election. And, people were like depressed. But given the overall results of the election, and now we've had some time to look at what has happened, I think you guys did a pretty great job in North Carolina. I mean, you have a lot to be proud of.
Well, we all do here in the state. It wasn't just me. It was a lot of other really great, talented people across North Carolina, including some fantastic candidates that we had that ran for State House and State Senate across the state. And so we were really proud to put up some good wins, even though national headwinds did not go our direction. And I know that people are still feeling great impacts from that right now across the country, too. But we were able to maintain an attorney general, break a supermajority, and make sure that we were able to hold a Supreme Court justice seat by 734 votes. And North Carolina Democrats held down a governor's office, too, against Mark Robinson, who is the person that, if folks remember last year, called himself the, quote, Black Nazi. And I think that we would have been in even dire constraints if we were under a Trump-Robinson administration right now versus the Trump-Steinwin that we find ourselves in, where we at least have a Democratic governor that's able to protect the people in North Carolina.
Yeah, I don't want to gloss over it too quickly. It's a remarkable effort that you led, but tens of thousands of people participated in protecting North Carolina. And we got to remember this was up against national headwinds, and while a whole bunch of people in the Republican Party were telling everybody in the state, hey, you just had a natural disaster and the Democrats are ignoring you. And you blew right through that.
Well, and, we owe a lot of that credit to people like Representative Lindsey Prather. She was out of Buncombe County, somebody that Republicans strategically targeted in the state legislature when they were able to redraw our maps in 2023 and redistricted our entire state through gerrymandering again. And Lindsey was someone that was targeted. She was in an R+3 district in western North Carolina and still managed to carry that district. And, a lot of that was because she talked to people in western North Carolina about what they needed. She showed up for them and really made the case about being a good public servant, which is what I think that I've always tried to say is what we need more of in politics and in government, is people that just really care about the people that they represent. And I think North Carolina showed that in every way this last election cycle by even people like Rachel Hunt, who's now our lieutenant governor, and Mo Green, who's now our state superintendent. We prioritized a lot of the things that I think are Democratic values. And I think I heard a lot of talk after the election about people saying that we might needed to have changed that or run away from our values in some ways. And for me, it's Democrats in North Carolina leaned into them more than ever. We just didn't have the same sort of disinformation machine that we find at the national level right now that Trump used throughout the entire 4 years of that presidency to really harm it, I think.
Yeah, and I remember this just from when I was a local alderman. I would talk about how many light bulbs we fixed across the streets, or how many miles of curbs got repaired, or which sewers I got, plumbed and cleaned and made work. And just doing the work that people wanted done gives you lots of, first off, it means that when people come in and say things about you, you know what, you get the benefit of the doubt. You can win in an R+3 district if you do the job and people see you doing it.
I think so. And I think that at the local level and the state level, that's where we still have to build back enough power to show people what the Democratic Party really is about, which is a party that's there to help people, and that our policies have enabled that. and we see it right now with Trump trying to cut Medicaid and health benefits from people across the entire country, and also the fact that they're denying coverage to people that are having or have benefits that are coming down from SNAP or from food stamps right now, or from anything that's a good federal purpose that Democrats have helped create and help build. And I think that we see them strategically trying to tear down that type of help right now from the government, and really trying to make the government look ineffective and weak. But we know that Democrats have been able to do better.
Let's talk about that. This criminal and dangerous era of MAGA rule, and I think it's criminal and dangerous, and it's breaking a long history of American democracy. But most Americans don't focus on things like democracy or the balance of power. I mean, we don't teach civics. I don't blame people for not focusing on it. But we do care about a lot of other things. And in those things in your state are being threatened. I mean, do people know that 20% of North Carolina's public school budget comes from the federal government? And if they shut the Department of Education, I guess no more football. I mean, do they understand that impounding all that money means closing schools, shutting hospitals? Is that message beginning to be felt?
I mean, I think it's something that Democrats have got to do a better job of talking about. The statistics that we're seeing coming out right now of programs that are being cut because of USAID funding and everything else. I mean, we could have been talking about that previously before the funding cuts happened, and I think that the reactionary part of that is where we always get flat-footed. But it's just an opportunity for us to grow. And I think that in terms of North Carolina, we are a state that has prided itself on public education, and a state that's invested in it. And Republicans in our state right now have spent the last two, general sessions and the state general assembly trying to make sure that they're defunding and putting more money into private school vouchers. We've seen that same mechanism across states like Texas and Iowa and otherwise throughout the country, that Republicans are targeting public education, not just, in the South, but also in states that are not, that do not, unfortunately, have a Democratic, stronghold in it like that right now.
Yeah, they're targeting them, and our public schools can be better, but their approach isn't solving any problem. It's leading to worse outcomes. I've had real experts on this show talking about it, Anderson. They are not making schools better for people. That's not what they're doing. They're making people some money. They're teaching religion, but they're not teaching kids.
I agree. I mean, Republicans in North Carolina are just trying to resegregate schools with private school vouchers. So I think that someone looked at me yesterday when I was in one of my rural counties, and they said that it was a money scam and a money grab. And I was like, yeah, basically. And Republicans have been able to do it for so long because they've gerrymandered our state to the point where Democrats don't have the ability to get fair representation in the state legislature. But we were able to stop them from having a supermajority by one vote in our state house this year. And that's something where we know we can at least stop any more bad pieces of legislation from defunding our public schools even more, which is what Republicans want to do. And then honestly building back for 26 to be able to make sure that people know that Democrats are the party that's putting working people first in the state. And that involves fighting for fair wages, right? Like Amazon today in North Carolina is trying to unionize for the first time in Garner. It would be the second Amazon unionization in the entire country. And so we're watching those votes today to see how that comes in. And I think there's a lot of opportunity in the South right now, and a lot of anger, at least from what I can see, even post-Trump presidency in that case, and post him being in the White House right now.
Yep. You have had a brutal Supreme Court battle, and you mentioned it earlier. Allison Riggs, the incumbent Democrat on the Supreme Court. Isn't she a Democrat? I mean, are they partisan labels on your Supreme Court judges?
Yeah, Republicans did that a while back to try to make it harder for Democrats to win elections, because nonpartisan races were always a place where Democrats were able to slide through. So they made them partisan, and Allison is only up by 734 votes, and Republicans are challenging those votes right now.
But let's talk about that, because she is up by 734 votes, and that's after multiple recounts. And then the Republicans are talking about disqualifying 65,000 voters. And Americans need to understand this, because they've got the SAFE Act and other things coming where voters are going to get disqualified by the millions across America. So you're ground zero for this. Talk about what they're trying. I mean, it sounds crazy, except that it's also on brand for these Republicans to throw 65,000 people off the voter rolls. Where does that stand now? I mean, I think something happened this week. And how does this end?
It is crazy, Edwin. It's insane what's happening down here in North Carolina. And I reiterate to folks listening right now that Republicans are using the Trump playbook that he had used for 2020 and was going to use again in 2024, depending on how those election results went for him, to deny voters the right to be able to know that when they went into the voting or to the ballot box that their votes were going to be safe and protected. So Jefferson Griffin, who is the Republican judge that lost to our Supreme Court Justice Allison Riggs right now, is challenging 67,000 voters in the state of North Carolina. A lot of those voters who have been voting in their communities for decades, but he is challenging them under one portion of voters is being challenged under the Help Americans Vote Act, which for anybody that remembers, that was a federal piece of legislation. It was passed in 2002 after 9/11, and it required states to either have one of two numbers attached to a voter registration form for anybody that got registered to vote. And what that was your Social Security number, the last four digits of it, or your driver's license number. And anybody that voted or that got registered to vote before 2002 got grandfathered into that system. And so this left a lot of people, they're called HAVA voters, that can be challenged in any state, which is why we know that North Carolina right now, if Republicans are successful in challenging these 67,000 under this, they're going to come for HAVA voters in every single state because it was a federal piece of legislation. And where it sits right now is that Wake County Superior Court decided that they ruled in favor of the voters, that these voters were legal and they should be counted, and that Jefferson Griffin appealed that case to the Court of Appeals, which is the bench that he currently sits on right now as a judge. And so he has got, and he's trying to get it basically before the North Carolina Supreme Court, because we know that right now we've got corrupt courts at the statewide level in North Carolina, and Democrats do not have a majority, and Republicans are trying to make it so that their buddies are going to decide the election for us instead of the voters in North Carolina. But what we also know is that we've got another appeals process, and we're going to take it up to the Eastern District with the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, which we still have the ability to do thanks to another decision that came down from the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals early in January. So there is an option for us to make it there before we have to go before the United States Supreme Court if it's to come to that. But, this race is going to be one that North Carolina, or people are going to pay attention to outside of North Carolina, whether you want to or not, sooner or later.
Right. I mean, if they can throw out 65,000 citizens who voted, nobody's saying they're not citizens. There's a loophole that is, bad on the registrars for not doing their job. But the voters did their job, and they're entitled to vote. And if they get away with getting rid of them in North Carolina, they're going to get rid of them in 49 other states with alacrity. So these legal cases are enormously important, but they're also enormously expensive. How do people help pay for them?
They are enormously expensive, and I'm sorry, I just laughed. I was like, wow, Edwin really set me up for that one. I'm over here in legal jargon land, and he's like, Anderson, we just want to help you out, girlfriend. You can go to ncdp.org. It is the way to help us donate. These legal fights are going to cost the state party upwards of $3 million, and it shouldn't be that way, but we're going to make sure we fight out and we have the best legal strategy possible to ensure that voters have what they need and that their votes are counted. And the only correction point that I would make on what you said earlier, Edwin, is that honestly, even the registrars did their jobs correctly. These voters have been in place even under Republicans in the governorship, and what we see Republicans doing right now are using the Cleta Mitchell playbook, the election integrity playbook, to be able to come into a state and try to take the Trump era playbook and make it a state model to challenge voters in 26 and in 28, because we know that 26 is going to be the last time that we really get to put a check on Donald Trump before the 28 election cycle, and they know that too.
And the 65,000 voters are thrown out. Does that impact other elections in the state? Do we suddenly have the governor's race back up for grabs?
No, Governor Josh Stein had a very comfortable margin with 15 points, so this will not impact him, but it has the potential to impact state legislative races that were very close on the margins, and, we don't know where these voters are, and so that is something that, besides when we did see that Jefferson Griffin strategically attacked 6 counties that are heavily Democratic counties, those being something like Wake and Mecklenburg and Durham and Guilford and Forsyth, and so we know that he is targeting Democratic-heavy counties and cherry-picking the voters that he's trying to target right now, too.
Well, if they say that the votes, that anybody who doesn't have those numbers on their voter registration can't vote, if they were registered after a certain time, I assume that will not just be limited to those counties.
Well, it is because those are the ones he's choosing. Like, he's challenging the election. He's doing the election protest of them. It's really interesting. And the funny thing is that there's no timeline on launching election protests like this. And that is a piece of legislation that you're going to see Democrats put up in the General Assembly this year, because no one should be able to challenge election results 100 days after the election. And that's what we're seeing, because, Jefferson Griffin, HAVA voters are only one section of these voters that Republicans are challenging right now. There are also military and overseas voters that they're challenging, and including people that may not have been able to submit a driver's license form back when they registered back when they submitted their absentee ballots. Jefferson Griffin himself voted by absentee ballot twice, and he is challenging the method in which he himself has voted through, because he was also a service member. And it's wild to me that he would want to disrespect the people that he served with like that and say that their votes don't deserve to be counted if there was a problem trying to have a photocopy of their ID sent back in their or with their absentee ballot, just because they are serving our country right now. Like, it might be hard for them to find a fax, you think.
Donald Trump voted by absentee once too, from Florida when he was still a New York resident. It's utter nonsense. But I'm fantasizing that you're going to go into the 3 strongest Republican counties in the state with the same suit.
No, I don't believe in disenfranchising voters, and that's not something that our party will ever stand on, unfortunately. And I think that the idea of that is something that we would never want to promote. But I do think that Republicans need to understand they are opening the Pandora's box to allow for that to happen in every single state. And I think that they need to understand that Democrats will soon use it against them, too. But North Carolina Democrats do not believe in taking away or stripping people's right to vote.
Good for you.
And for them to respect the ballot box, right? Like, people need to feel safe when they go in to do that. And this is challenging their right through.
Okay, so talk to me about the progress in overcoming the flood disaster. Is the state cleaned out? Is cleaned up? Is Asheville okay? What's that look like?
I mean, it's going to take years for Western North Carolina to recover from Hurricane Helene. And right now what we're seeing is a state legislature that's prioritized taking away people or, public officials' right to be able to do their jobs. And back in December, Senate Bill 382 was what Republicans pushed through our General Assembly. Instead of giving, grants to Western North Carolina small businesses instead of loans, they were too busy trying to strip powers away from our incoming Democratic governor, attorney general, and state superintendent, and they were able to do so. And that impacted Western North Carolina's ability to have aid quickly. We saw Governor Stein earlier this last month, actually release his budget, which is asking for over $1.1 billion in aid to Western North Carolina, and we saw Republicans come back with only $500 million, and it's not going to do what it needs to do for that region unless they fulfill his budgetary requirements for it. And so my heart goes out to everybody out there right now, and I know that we've got Democratic Party headquarters out there that are trying to make sure that they're resource hubs for anyone that might need something, that they are giving back to nonprofits in the community and making sure that we're volunteering with folks like Beloved Asheville that have done phenomenal work out there in Western North Carolina, and also other mutual aid organizations on the ground. But this state legislature has a lot to owe the people that are out there right now, and their Republican state legislators too that denied and that would not stick with us on that. So, that's what we said.
Popular. I don't believe the good people of North Carolina, regardless of what party they are, thinks it's a good idea to spend your time and energy trying to use political power to get more of it by changing the rules, as opposed to just helping people who were the victims of this terrible disaster. How is that popular in the state?
I mean, they bent their will to political party. There were 3 Republicans that voted against Senate Bill 382 on the first go-round of it. Governor Cooper came in and vetoed it because, again, it was taking away power from incoming elected officials that Western North Carolina residents had just voted for overwhelmingly. Jeff Jackson had great support coming out of Western North Carolina to be the next Attorney General. And instead of actually respecting the voters of the state, they decided, and instead of helping people, they decided to attack them. And I think that, what we saw was those 3 Republicans voted with their party to override Governor Cooper's veto of the bill. And obviously it wasn't enough for them to think that they were going to actually respect the people that were out in Western North Carolina. And we're just going to have to keep reminding people of it, educating them about it, because when you're 3 hours away from the state capitol, it's really easy for people to ignore you.
Yeah, this is a phenomenon around the country that people don't pay enough attention to what's going on in their state capitals, and enormous corruption. And the playbook for what we're seeing now in Washington was perfected in state capitals over the last 20 years.
I mean, you can argue that Project 2025 has been in North Carolina for the last 14. Like, they have been hell-bent on destroying any single check and balance on our state legislature and have made them the gods of this state right now. And I think that that's been a huge problem when it comes to allocation of public school funding. Our Republican-dominated court system is still sitting on public school funding that would impact in the terms of billions of dollars of funding that we need right now from the Leandro plan. Everything's happening at your state legislature, and I know maybe not in some of my other blue bastions, but right here in the red states, like we have to get involved in our own backyards, and that's exactly what North Carolina Dems are going to continue to do, to be honest with you.
Well, okay, so you broke or kept them from getting a supermajority. What are the chances of making some more progress in the next round?
We had the ability to make a lot of progress, and there were state legislative seats that, to be honest with you, we should have won, and we didn't. Vice President Harris has a great track record and also and won some of the House seats that, honestly, we did not, and that's something that we're going to try to investigate, whether it was name recognition of Republican candidates or what we need to do differently in those districts to really make Democratic gains in them for 26, and also looking at the fact that Governor Stein won 14 counties that Trump also won in the state, and there has got to be a good reason for that and where we can invest our time and energy into for just expanding our map while we're still under a gerrymandered state legislative map. But that is only going to get us to 2028 because we are going to take our Republican-dominated Supreme Court in 2028 after we hold Justice Earls' seat on the state Supreme Court this year and also take 3 Republican seats that will be up in 2028. And that will give us the ability to, bypass and honestly bring back up and say that partisan gerrymandering and we need to be able to redistrict North Carolina again, like we did in the 2022 election cycle.
I think people have to understand that like it or not, state Supreme Courts are where maps are drawn these days. The federal courts, John Roberts said, the federal government is closed to gerrymandering cases. It won't help. But state courts still can. And so this is why Republicans will cheat in order to hold Supreme Courts, because they want a Supreme Court like the one they had in Wisconsin until it was broken that said an illegal map is a legal map. Shocking, isn't it? Shocking.
I mean, North Carolina is the reason why Leader Hakeem Jeffries is not Speaker of the House right now. Like, our 3 gerrymandered seats are the reason why, the fact that we got stripped of congressional representation. And so if you think that that's not where it exists and where it matters, and that's where I'm like, until we're able to get a majority in Congress and pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, like, we are not going to end gerrymandering nationwide, and we're not going to get the majorities that Democrats really deserve in Congress. So North Carolina is battleground zero for that right now, protecting the state itself, and that runs through our state courts, and we know that.
Well, it couldn't have a better advocate than they have in you, and you have inspired lots and lots of people, great people, to feel like.
You gotta stop complimenting me.
Well, hey, Anderson,
I'm like, oh Lord.
Before you were on, I was talking to an absolutely fabulous environmentalist named Catherine Hayhoe, just world-class environmentalist. But she spends a lot of time on the science. She also spends a lot of time telling people you can make a difference and showing them how. And the things that she said were, look, people want you to feel like you're helpless, like you can't make a difference, but you can. And get out and talk to your neighbors and talk about this problem and go volunteer and do the things that you can do because you have power to make a difference. And you've shown that by helping people find that they have the power to make a difference in a state. And that's what great political organizing is. You let people know they still have. When Donald Trump says you are powerless, you will follow or be destroyed, people like you are out there all over the country saying, no, sorry, mister, we have power. And we know all of us can use it.
Well, Edwin, I hope you come out. I'm going to be in DuPage County on March the 2nd, I think, and I'm going to be in Chicago on the 3rd. So I hope I get to be with you at some point in time when I'm out there. But North Carolinians are coming out. We're going to do a little fundraiser.
Offline. Yep. Excellent. All right, Anderson. Thank you.
Thank y'all.
Yep. Okay, folks, we're going to take a break, and I think Yasmin Rajdi's coming up next.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
All right, everybody. Yasmin Rajdi is back. She is the executive director of one of my favorite organizations, Swing Left. She leads with vision and determination and a whole lot of experience in elections and advocacy and organizing and outreach and fundraising. Since we first talked a few years ago, honestly, I felt a connection that soldiers fighting in the same battlefield, a combination of gratitude and trust. And so I'm happy that she's back to talk about Swing Left's plans and the fight that's ahead of us.
Thank you so much for having me, Edwin. I feel like in dark moments like this, getting to reconnect with trusted allies in the fight is what's keeping me hopeful and focused. So thanks for having me.
Yeah. Hey, let's start with where we are. There are, and I'm just going to be depressing for a second, there are a number of organizations that measure things like democratic strength around the world. And one of them is the Center for Systemic Peace. And this week they issued a report saying, and let me just read it, the USA is no longer considered a democracy and lies on the cusp of autocracy. It has experienced a presidential coup and adverse regime change event. And former Secretary Robert Reich agrees with them. He's called on the mainstream media to call it a coup. Now, they're still outliers, to be sure. I mean, my friend Chris Geidner thinks the rule of law is holding just barely. But everybody is worried, and it's no longer debatable that we are in really unfamiliar and dangerous territory. And that's all background to ask you this. The implications are so many, but one is that the tactics we used in the past are not likely to be the best tactics going forward. So, how do you think about what we need to do in this moment?
Yeah, I think the way that my processing of this moment has been actually pretty paradoxical, because on the one hand, and I think this is important as we think about what needs to be wholesale reimagined and what needs to be tweaked and what falls into each category. On the one hand, we just lived through an election where there literally was not any room for error. We knew it was going to be close at the presidential level. We knew there was going to be close at the Senate level with a tough map. We knew it would be close at the House level. And we knew we could win, but if we made any missteps, the stakes of a loss, which we're experiencing now, were existential for our democracy. And we are, I think in just a few short weeks, we are seeing the roadmap of Project 2025 was exactly that, a very specific roadmap that they are meeting day to day and week to week. And so I say that because on the one hand, that means that we all rightly, we've got to throw everything out and adopt an entirely new playbook, because if we weren't able to defeat someone who was selling authoritarianism and we weren't able to make the case to voters that, the alternative was leaps and bounds better, and that Democrats stand, every single Democratic Party position is a majoritarian one. I mean, ones that poll at sort of 80% with voters. If we weren't able to make the case on majoritarian issues compellingly, then maybe the whole thing is broken, right? And that is both true, and the facts were also that the election was as close as we imagined it would be. And again, there wasn't room for error, and the costs of having lost are that a lot of people are going to lose their lives. A lot of our institutions are going to break in ways that we won't be able to fix for a generation, right? But as we think about what do we need to change and how dramatically do we need to change it, some of the things that are, again, kind of getting my brain into a paradoxical state are, we only lost the House by, and I want to pull up the number so I don't get, because it's a number I have on a postcard right next to my computer, 7,309 votes across 3 districts. So just over 7,000 votes out of 148 million votes cast. And I'm anchoring there. I think we've all probably read the presidential numbers, too, of our battleground states were just, around 6 percentage points. Wisconsin, 1.5. And we can take those all, and those can make us defensive as Democrats, right? They could say, well, we got it wrong, but we only got it a little bit wrong. So let's maybe just reshape the ad around the edges, or, change a couple of the prepositions in our sentences and we'll be fine. And that is certainly not the answer. But I think it's also that we've got to do a really rigorous autopsy. And in that autopsy, which is going to take time because we still don't have the voter file, which is the sort of the full data set of exactly, what happened, how did different tactics perform. We have to really look at that work seriously and understand not just what are my feelings of what worked and didn't work, but what actually did and didn't. And then once we've done that, we've got to be really honest with ourselves about some of the things that we did that actually were effective, but not effective enough. So do we need to make some changes around the edges? And what are some things that we are really used to doing? Maybe there are things that feel good. Maybe there are things that we've built organizations around. We built programs around. People's entire jobs are around that we actually should not be doing at all anymore, or we should be so wholesale reimagining that they're going to change the air that we breathe. And again, that is intentionally broad because we've got to figure out the specifics within those categories. And of course, that includes in messaging, but it also includes in tactics like, for example, canvassing. Canvassing is the number one tactic that swing left volunteers take in those final days of an election. And then, earlier in the election, they also write letters, they make calls. But in those final days, got buses of people in places like where you are in Chicago, getting on a bus and going to Milwaukee to go knock on doors. And the question should not be, should we stop canvassing, right? The question should be, what is working and what is not working in how we are talking to voters in their communities. And that is through canvassing, that is through local, engagement, that is through, digital engagement, et cetera. How are we meeting them there? And one of my early hypotheses that I think we need to test is if you're talking to people for the first time, reading a script 3 days before an election, doesn't matter how message tested and poll tested that script is, no human being is going to randomly change their entire political perspective and all the things that they've thought about in, a 2-minute conversation. But what happens if we, as a party, decide, let's start having those conversations 2 years before an election, and that they are, ongoing conversations with follow-up, with someone says they're really worried about grocery prices, that someone is following up with them and making sure that they are, getting support to job training or whatever the cases may be. And that is, I think, the sort of as we do the kind of wholesale reimagination, something we're thinking about at Swing Left is we've got to keep executing, right? We've got a Wisconsin Supreme Court race on April 1st. We've got to start the work to win back the House in 2026 now. And while we are executing, we also need to be going under the hood of the car and seeing not just, all right, is the motor working, but why is the motor broken? And then what kind of a motor do we need to replace the thing with? And are there other parts of the car that need sort of refurbishing or wholesale, throwing the pieces out? So anyway, that's the kind of my broad thinking. And of course, happy to get into more details.
Well, I want to talk about that's fascinating. I also want to save time before we leave to talk Wisconsin, because that's really important.
Yeah.
About Wisconsin, just right now, canvassing, I was among those who went up and canvassed in Wisconsin. And there's a reason why, it was a 6-point swing, but in Wisconsin it was 1.5. And one of the differentiators was the amount of canvassing that went on. So I expect you won't find that it's worthless. I think what makes a huge difference what we did. There were other errors and headwinds, big ones. But I think some of those tactics are sound and will continue. But I love your observation that you can't just show up and make a difference. The other guys figured this out a long time ago, which is why they bought the media ecosystem and brand their party and ours 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. And I find that what a large chunk of Americans, 40% of Americans, not most, think about Democrats and what we stand for comes from Republicans, not from us.
That's right. Yeah, it's sort of like we are waiting to see what temperature it is, and then we are deciding, all right, so how do I want to operate in that temperature, rather than what the Republicans doing is they are building an air conditioner to make the weather cooler, or they are, sort of like putting jackets on everybody so that it feels hot outside. They are shaping the conditions, and we are reacting to them. And I think that the key thing, I certainly don't have the answer of, and I don't think there is one answer, right? Like, what they have done is as you said, they've shaped the media ecosystem. They've also shaped the court system. They have rigged the rules in a lot of states to suppress voters. They have, in places like Florida, when they see that ballot measures work on issues that are inconvenient to them, they change the rules of, instead of just a simple 50 point something percent majority, just breaking 50%, you have to break 60%, right? So
they tried to do that in Ohio too. Yep.
That's right. That's exactly right. And so they're very smart about shaping conditions, around them so that they are successful. But I think what we do that, of course, we need to, shape our own conditions and do so in ways that are aligned with our democracy. I think they're consistently doing these things in ways that undermine so much of the core of what makes this country strong and great, and that has made us survive as long as we have as a strong superpower. But we also don't act with the confidence of being a party that has majoritarian positions. Like, we are acting as though our positions on reproductive health care, on gun violence prevention, that these are sort of like issues that maybe half the country agrees on, rather than the overwhelming majority of Americans. I mean, all these issues poll around 80% with people. And oftentimes, as we are, whether it's that we're communicating in this sort of, media landscape or digitally, whether it's talking to a voter face to face, there is some sort of like self-effacing insecurity that we have of like, gosh, like, I'm not sure that I can reach this person, rather than leading with curiosity of where someone is, why they may hold the idiosyncratic beliefs that they do, what they're going through that shapes their conditions. And also what's underneath when they say something like, I'm pro-life. Well, underneath that, there actually may be a lot of openness to voting for reproductive freedom despite their own position, rather than saying, well, oops, this person isn't on my side. And I think what Republicans do is, and they do this cynically, but when someone disagrees in a, Facebook group, they ask a lot of questions, they engage, they follow up, et cetera. And again, we should have the confidence to speak full-throatedly and to lead with the belief that we can bring people to our side, because we can, but we can't do it through sort of just like, again, an ad or one conversation. It's got to be curious, deep engagement that also takes as much listening, learning, and paying attention as it does speaking, communicating, sort of like sending things out.
So that raises an uncomfortable question for many on the left, and that's just, are we intolerant? I mean, this notion of you either are with me on all these issues I agree about, or we hate you. You're not us. Mm-hmm. And I think we are quick to do that. And my view about coalitions in politics is they are a mechanism to gain power, not a signaling mechanism to say I'm standing next to you. So can we agree that things are important enough now so that people don't have to agree with us 100% on every issue, and we can just work together and win?
I mean, yeah. How much of a percent agreement can I have? 1,000%, 1,000,000%? Yes. It is. I think it is so important that we understand. I mean, this is the mantra of any good organizer is it's no permanent allies and no permanent adversaries, only permanent interests, right? And so that means that you're quoting
Edmund Burke to me.
There we got it. We got to go back to our roots here, But I suspect, Edwin, that you and I, if we were to do a full, audit of our beliefs, we'd agree on, let's say, a lot. Let's say we agreed on 80, 90%. Maybe in the 10% where we disagree, there's some pretty hard disagreements, some intractable disagreements, some disagreements that make me really mad, right?
Yes.
Does that mean that we shouldn't work together, right? And so I think that's the thing is building, I think, what the beauty of a high-functioning democracy that we need to model not just in the sort of esoteric of how is our country, but in the small ways of how we work together in, it's like what I think this is going to be my second time talking about de Tocqueville on your show, and you just bring it out in me. But what de Tocqueville talked about in the unique nature of democracy in America was that the mores and habits of public life were built small institutional contexts of people's union halls and congregations and all that kind of stuff. And what that means is you learn how to disagree, you learn how to debate, and you learn how to show up next to each other. And that's not just disagreement about sort of what color should we paint the walls of our church. That might be really deep disagreement about core parts of our identities, of who we are, what we care about. And if we can't learn to, and disagreement, I think also healthy disagreement means really good listening and curiosity. And I know I've said that already in this conversation, but I think that is, when I see moments of intolerance on our side, there are moments of lack of curiosity, of just writing someone off because they didn't say something the right way, or they have a different belief than you. Is this someone who doesn't have the same information? Is this someone who has a different world experience? Is this someone who maybe I can find some common ground, maybe not even on the issue or on the position, but on how they got there, right? I think a lot of people in the MAGA movement are where they are and are really vulnerable to the racist dog whistles of their side because of some underlying very real economic angst. And if we just take them at the dog whistle and we don't go underneath and see, what does it look like? We can return to, Wisconsin. In places like Wisconsin, where so many jobs have just disappeared forever, of course someone's going to have economic angst underneath, anything that they're feeling. And so if we don't lead with the curiosity to figure out maybe the reason why they are angry about, woke America and DEI and whatever dog whistles has a deeper root that we can agree with, and then we can meet them there. I think we've got to be comfortable with discomfort, and we've got to also figure out where do we agree with people.
Yeah, you can't save a country if you want to get rid of half of it. I mean, that's exactly right. We're all here. We might as well. I mean, families fight. They're still families. We have disagreements. We have to figure out how to make space for it, but how to save what we love. And
completely agree. Completely.
All right. So let's turn a little bit to this unbelievably important moment again in Wisconsin.
Again. Yes.
So tell everybody about the race and why you're focused on it.
Yes, I was just going to say, it feels like a happy anniversary to this same conversation 2 years ago, and it'll be a lot of the same pieces, which is, so this is, it's a race for folks who are not yet following this, that comes up on April 1st. Obviously, weird timing for an election to be on April Fool's Day, but here we are. I feel like everything has a sort of a cynical joke under it in these times. But on April 1st, Wisconsin Democrats are going to have the opportunity to hold a progressive majority, right? The Supreme Court in the state of Wisconsin they're elected seats. These are not partisan seats, but there are judges who tilt more liberal and more conservative. And like with everything in this moment, tilting liberal and tilting conservative no longer is tilting, right? I think folks are so sort of deeply rooted in very different worldviews here that we're really talking about 4 quite liberal and 3 hyper-conservative MAGA Republicans on the court. We currently have that majority, 4-3, and one of those seats one of the liberals is retiring, and so we have to hold that seat. And the reason that this matters, including for people, I know many of your listeners are in Chicago, but even listeners very far away from Chicago, the reason this really matters is because state Supreme Courts, like the one in Wisconsin, are places where when elections are really tight, right? When if in 2028 things continue as they are in Wisconsin, and we're talking about a single percentage point difference in the outcome of the race, and we've all experienced before things like contested presidential race that all comes down to Florida. We want to make sure that there is a fair court, and there are people in the majority on the court who will vote based on information and reality, not on doing Donald Trump's bidding for him. And so from a presidential election standpoint, this is going to be important. There's also Wisconsin is a place where redistricting continues to be on the table, and there are upcoming cases that will determine the nature of how competitive upcoming House districts will be. That could mean that up to 3 competitive House races in Wisconsin will be determined based on how the court rules on how lines can and can't be drawn. So this could mean the House majority will come down to whether or not we have a fair arbiter on the Supreme Court, or whether we have a MAGA extremist, we have a fair arbiter majority on the court, or whether we have a MAGA extremist majority that is, once again, there's no such thing as a conservative that thinks, a conservative elected official that thinks freely now. They are all just deferring to Donald Trump. And so there is just so much at stake in a race that is going to come down to just a few thousand votes, and that is so far off cycle that it's also not going to be giant turnout the way that we're used to in a presidential election. So what we're doing at Swing Left and actually announcing this weekend is engagement for anyone anywhere in the country to be able to support Judge Susan Crawford is the name of the liberal candidate, the Wisconsin Dems that are going to be doing tremendous organizing in support of her race, to support the 2 of those, their efforts financially, and also to begin making phone calls and for folks that are in or around Wisconsin to be able to go out and knock on doors. That work has to start right now, right? So for folks who are freaking out about everything that is happening in Washington and just how hard it feels to be able to show up when the integrity of our courts seems to have gone out the window and things feel more dire than in 2017, 2018, and also feel like there's only so many calls they can make to their member of Congress, and they have made them all or continue to make them all. This electoral piece of the puzzle is going to be really critical that folks plug in on, because ultimately, even if we can slow Trump down in the federal courts, even if we call our members of Congress and can slow some things down, this is ultimately just about power, right? We need to have liberal majorities in our courts. We need to have Democratic majorities in our government, or else we can't fix the problems that MAGA extremism is bringing to this country.
Yeah, I have always disagreed with the phrase peaceful transfer of power because I don't think power has ever transferred in America. It belongs to the people, and the people are sovereign. This is the first election where we've transferred power away from American people into something completely different. And so people can call Congress, but the Republicans in Congress, with very few exceptions and not enough to change anything, are in lockstep with this autocratic push. The only way we retain our sovereignty is to win big enough majorities that they can't be cheated out of. And Wisconsin is ground zero again because electing Janet Protasiewicz, the last time we did this on the Supreme Court, ended their gerrymandered maps. And at least at the state level, and freed all those people in Wisconsin from the terrible governance that they had been living under. They deserve better. That's right. And they could go backwards, or we could keep going forwards. And that's what this is about, not just for the people of Wisconsin, but as you point out, the actual next presidential election and control of Congress rests in large measure on one silly off-cycle Supreme Court race in Wisconsin.
That's right. And because of that, it is projected that this is going to be the single most expensive state Supreme Court race in American history. And that is just because of how much is at stake. So if we don't show up fully and full-throatedly, not just folks in Wisconsin, not just folks near Wisconsin, but all of us who care about the future of this country, you better bet that the other side is doing it. And they are, if we had any doubts about how well organized they are, we could just look back to the most recent election. And so they're going to pour so many resources, and they're going to organize like hell. And they're going to, and they're doing that because they know if they don't continue both sort of winning power, but also, winning courts in a way that they can then manipulate the future of decisions made in this country. They're not on the side of the vast majority of the American people. And so this is just what they've done for the past generation plus, and that they're continuing to do. And we've got to play the same game, but play it better, and play it in a way that is in line with our small d democratic values.
Yeah. I mean, look, if anybody doubts how powerful the Republican Party and organization is in Wisconsin, just think of this. They had the power to put the stupidest man in the country in the United States Senate in Ron Johnson. I mean, right? He is an idiot. You put him up next to, I don't know, a stone, and the stone wins every time. He's an idiot and he's a danger. And yet they were able to put him in the Senate and reelect him because that's how much they don't care about their people, and that's how much they don't care about our democracy. He's just a deadweight moron and bagman for the stolen votes, the fake electors 4 years ago. And yet they could elect him. So we can't take this for granted. We can't count on being able to win. Something as simple as we need an honest judge. That it's going to take work. That
is all so true. And I actually think in what you just said, there's another lesson for us as Democrats, which is the Republican Party is not waiting for a perfect hyper charismatic, good looking, perfectly articulate, zinger of an online communicator to just appear in every congressional and Senate seat to come and save their party, right? They're dealing with, folks that are like Ron Johnson, not a whole lot going on upstairs, but also, the guy also has the charisma of a stone, right? So it's not that he's not.
No, he's terrible in every way.
But he's somehow a great communicator, right?
Yep.
But they figure out, all right, if you don't have a great candidate, you still need that seat because you need a Senate majority. And I think that I, of course, want there to be, infinite Democrats who are as good at fighting, on TV and in Congress as Jasmine Crockett, and who are as sort of like cerebral and able to communicate complicated things simply like Chris Murphy. Of course, I want someone who's as inspiring as Barack Obama. we deserve, a plethora of riches, of talent, of all the different things. And we don't need them in every single district. And so that's the other thing that we just have to learn as Democrats is the balance of power is what matters. We don't need to be emotionally moved by every candidate. And so that's something that that I constantly am talking about with our volunteers and donors who really get it. I mean, they really, really do. If you find a frontline Democrat or a Democrat who's running in a seat that needs to be flipped, you don't find them that inspiring, it doesn't really matter. What we need is a majority, and that if we get a majority, that means Hakeem Jeffries has the gavel. It means that we have a chance at legislating. It means we have a chance at putting a check on Donald Trump. And the same goes for the Senate and so on and so forth. And if Republicans didn't know that lesson, they wouldn't have the power that they do now, No,
they think in systems and they think in brand. They do not care who sits in the seat. They don't care.
And in numbers. Ultimately, you need 51%, right? You don't need a really, really talented minority. You need a strong majority.
Yeah. All right. Well, that is a great place to end. I love your work. Everybody who's listening, we've talked about this before. Go on Swing Left's website, sign up, and let's get to work again in Wisconsin. Let's win this race on April 1st and start to send the message around the country that, we're sick of being losers. And we're not. I think we did pretty well last time up against very, very heavy odds. I thought we would do better, but we didn't do – we lost by the tiniest amount, and no amount of BS from the Oval Office – where I guess somebody had a press conference wearing a MAGA hat, and yet another violation of the Hatch Act, but they're lawless. Let's just go after them and win it back.
Totally. And let's do so with the confidence that we should have that the American people are on our side. They don't. Most people don't agree with everything, but they certainly agree with the vast majority of the Democratic Party platform. And what Trump is selling is not something that they're going to keep buying. So thank you, Edwin, for hosting this conversation and for all that you do.
Thank you, Yasmin. Talk to you soon.
You're looking at the big picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back. It's a little after 3 o'clock here in the Upper Midwest, and I am delighted to continue a set of conversations that we've been having with fabulous scholars. And today we're joined by Abe Newman. He's a professor in the School of Foreign Services at Georgetown University. He's the author of several books, including the absolutely terrifying Underground Empire, How America Weaponized the World Economy. He and his research partner, Henry Farrell, recently published a fabulous piece in Lawfare called Elon Musk Weaponizes the Government. And I'll send out a link to that piece later today. Read it, but we'll talk about some of that now. Professor Newman, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Edwin, and I'm glad I was a little bit terrifying, although a little bit sad, too, that that's the world we're in.
So your scholarship requires a great deal of expertise in the details of governing systems, of financial systems inside the government, of political economy. For us regular folks, the impossible to see international connections these all make. And that was obvious in your book, but now those things allowed you to see, perhaps before most others in the country, the sort of shocking threat now turned on our own safety and prosperity by the new Trump administration.
Yeah, so maybe just to kind of give a little perspective, my work it's on the really boring things, the things that kind of make your brain go numb. There are behind our perfectly functioning society, there are all of these infrastructures. You might think of them as like the plumbing of capitalism, the plumbing of government. And so I spent about 10 years looking at how these global infrastructures, things like the operating system behind Apple and Google, or the production systems that make the chip in your cell phone, the TSMC or Samsung, or the financial infrastructures. So when you make a transaction on your phone, it goes basically through 10 or so banks. Things like fiber optic cables. All of these things, they power the world. And starting after 9/11, the U.S. government started to realize that they could use these to get at their adversaries, either to watch them, to monitor what they were doing, or to cut them out of these key choke points in the global economy. And that's, we do this still to this day with things like the Russia sanctions program, or when we're fighting over AI with China. But the piece that you mentioned is really taking those insights about the international system and kind of shedding some light on what is Elon Musk and Doge, what are they doing right now in the U.S. government.
So before we turn to Musk and Doge and their attack on us, I want to spend a minute on the post 9/11 use of what I love this word. You described it as the panopticon, the ability to see everything in the financial systems of the world. It gave the U.S. power, and I guess the Patriot Act gave it legal authority and other acts to do things like, say, Iran, you can't be part of the global financial system. It was a furtherance of an anti-terror foreign policy, and maybe more. Maybe it furthered other policy ends that weren't as obvious to Americans. Do I have that right?
Yes. I mean, it starts very much where the U.S. faces this really unprecedented thing where globalization has been used basically as a weapon against the homeland. The terrorists are using these financial systems, the airplanes, in order to attack the United States. And so you have these bureaucracies all over the U.S. government thinking, what can they do? How can they respond? And they start to uncover these maps of these global infrastructures and realize that there are opportunities to flip the script and use globalization, not just as something that could be used against the United States, but that could be used against the terrorists. And as you mentioned, one of the first things they start to do is this idea of the panopticon. There was this guy, Jeremy Bentham. He was a utopian philosopher, and utopian philosophers, they come up with a lot of, what can they make the best things of? And he had the idea of the best prison. And the idea was, if you make a circular prison and you put a tower in the middle, you only need one guard in order to watch everybody, because everybody's rooms are facing the center, and then that one guard can surveil everybody. And so the U.S. government was thinking, okay, if I can just tap into one of these choke points in these networks, I can know what the terrorists are doing. And we started our research, my co-author Henry Farrell and I, around there's this organization in Belgium. It's called SWIFT, and now I think people are more familiar with it. When we started doing this research, nobody had heard about it, but it's like a encrypted post office for banks. If you make a global financial transaction in the world, it's routed through SWIFT, which basically sends the message between the banks. And so the U.S. government subpoenaed SWIFT. It was secret at the beginning, and then the New York Times did an expose which uncovered it a few years later. But then they could really watch where was this terrorist money going, and then they could, target those networks.
Right. So something powers that we created in order to defend ourselves are now being used, and I want to turn to that. My only parenthetical is you rang the bell for the first person in the 3 years I've been doing this show to mention Jeremy Bentham, whose head I saw in a box at the University College in London, because was that kind of crazy guy back then. So, 5 points for that. It's like an old Groucho Marx show, the duck would come down. Congratulations to Jeremy Bentham.
Awesome. I love that.
Okay, so now talk about, so we have all of these systems, and people go about their day, they don't care about anything, but if their basement floods because the plumbing breaks, suddenly it's like an 11-alarm fire and nothing else matters. And you pointed out that, in fact, the world financial systems have plumbing. The world's HR systems have plumbing. The world's real estate systems have plumbing. And all of that is stuff that we have now sort of figured out how to look at to protect ourselves, and it's being turned against us. So talk about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I just, when I started to watch what Doge was doing in those first days, they were basically going to all of these agencies, and there were these very weird newspaper reports like, staff locked out of laptops, or, why does Doge want the data at the Office of Personnel Management? And then the one that was really, I thought, very scary was there was this kind of senior civil servant who resigned on a Friday night from the Treasury Department, and he oversees the Treasury payment system. And it was just, it was like connecting the dots of like, well, these are boring, plumbing, not of the global economy, but of the U.S. government. And it, when you saw what Musk was starting to say online, like, oh, why, this Lutheran organization are getting all this money, or, it's starting to kind of do the same kind of thing, this either the panopticon watching what people are doing, or all the other kind of thing that we talk about in our work is the choke point, which is cutting people off from these. And so whether it was personnel systems, the Office of Personnel Management, the GSA, which is responsible for IT and real estate, or the Treasury with payments, it's a similar kind of thing. Putting yourself in the middle of these data flows then gives you the ability, theoretically, to either watch what everybody's doing or to limit, cut people out of certain types of activities.
And we know they have done both now. So let me just try a very simple explanation, because, again, this is a complicated idea when you get into the systems. But like if a private citizen were given by the President of the United States an Abrams tank and drove it onto the expressway and had a little drone flying above so he could see all the traffic coming, that private citizen in the tank could say to me, trying to get to my mother's house, you know what, go another way or I'm going to blow you up. And you basically have, whether it's the federal payment system or at OPM, which is all of the personnel, or at GSA, which is all of the property and contracts of the federal government, you now have Elon Musk sitting there in an Abrams tank saying, and with his little drones above, saying, I'm learning all this information. I'm going to, by the way, use all the data for my own benefit. I'm going to learn from it. But I also, if the president wants, will stop funding to the Lutheran Church.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the difficult thing is that it's the government. They can have access to this information, and they can think about, like, should they pass legislation that reforms how funds are transmitted? Do you know what I mean? It's like they can change their personnel staffing and try to pass a law that revokes the protections that civil servants have. But what's happening right now is that it's not going through the traditional congressional process, or there are some things they are doing. They have the executive authority to do it. But I think there's a series of threats that are really very serious that people need to think about. The first is just simply the risk to the security of this data. So much of it is really sensitive. It includes, things like your bank account information, your social security number, information about, different types of benefits that you have received. So you're not supposed to just be able to plug a laptop into this kind of a system and then start recoding these things. And so several IT professionals have made very, I think, rightly, but also quite drastic warnings of just, this is stuff you shouldn't be messing around with. We don't know what's happening, and that you could create a cyber risk that either some external agent could get into these systems because you've opened them up to the world. I think the second risk you mentioned, which I think is really important, which is it gives somebody who runs many businesses basically insider information that other competitors are not receiving. So, you just think about, like, wouldn't a lot of people want to be able to see this kinds of data that are competitors of Musk, and what kind of disadvantage are they put at because of it? And then the third part is that many of these systems, they are, like I said before, they're the infrastructures. They're just the things that we rely on to happen so that we can have faith in our financial system, in our government. And this is not the part that's supposed to be politicized. The part that's supposed to be politicized is the legislative process, deciding the priorities. These payment systems are like just the switches on a train. The person that runs them is a civil servant. They're just trying to get the money to go. It's already been authorized. So their decision at that point is not to choose yes or no, but it's just to make the payment happen. And if those things stop working, then people, they can't rely on very fundamental institutions of just the economy to work.
Yes, and the trillions of dollars can be corrupted and used for other purposes. I mean, just help me understand what system allowed Mr. Musk and gang to reach into New York City's bank account and withdraw $80 million in a FEMA grant this week.
So that is, I think, very troubling. It's a different aspect of this. So the things we've talked about up until now have primarily been the government's side, the government networks, the Treasury Department, the OPM, GSA, the systems they run. But there are these two reports, one of a bank account for New York City, that there was a FEMA payment into that account and it got revoked. And there you're moving into almost back to the story that I was telling about how the government uses private networks, for coercion, because they're reaching into the banking system. So this is no longer the Treasury doing it. It's like it's asking, in this case, I think it was Citibank, to refund the money. And the story about it is interesting, and it's unclear yet exactly what happened, because whenever you make a transfer, a financial transfer, I think it's something called ACH, you have a certain number of days when you're doing one of these payments to say, I didn't mean to make that payment. So any citizen could be like, oh, it was fraud, I didn't mean to do that. Or you have, I think it's maybe 3 to 5 days or something to revoke the payment. And so some people are saying, look, all the government did was that. It was like the payment had just been made, it had landed in the bank, and they just revoked the payment. But there's another set of reporting which suggests that the bank had to comply with this because it was an overdraft of the New York City's account, and so they had to be involved somewhat. And so I think it's worth pushing further of like how far into the private banking system did the government get, and we'll see that there's this other case with the EPA where they have threatened to claw back money that is, I think it's also maybe at Citibank, of several nonprofits that do environmental work, and they're saying they want the money returned. And if they do claw that back, that is beyond this temporary, just kind of we made a mistake window. This is like forcing the banks into somehow returning the people's money. And if that happens, it's very serious. I think, because what would to stop them from doing that just to anybody? There's no. Wait, I don't understand.
I just want to be sure I understand. You're saying that post the ACH window, that the law allows somebody to say, "Hey, I need to revoke that." That they are saying they are going to reach into someone's bank account and simply take money, just because it originally came from them, but they gave it pursuant to law, and the moment for revoking is over. So they're really just reaching into somebody's account and taking their money.
At least the reporting that I have read, that is, in this case of the EPA, the EPA head is that's what he's said should happen. But that's as far as the reporting that I understand.
Okay, and just so the reporting that I've seen on this is that in this particular case, these environmental organizations are concerned with something called environmental racism, that just there are neighborhoods that have been dumping grounds, and they happen to be, neighborhoods that are predominantly not white. So the government is saying, we can steal your money if you do that. That is enormously coercive.
Yes, and I mean, I think with both of these cases, with the FEMA case and with the EPA case, once again, the government could potentially do these things if they had a system of due process. Do you know what I mean? Where there was some legal basis for trying to get this money back. The U.S. does this, for example, with money laundering. It's like says, okay, you violated these terrorism statutes, and so we're going to seize this money. It's not something that is beyond the government's authority, but usually, or not.
Well, they have to be convicted of something, sure, to be fined. You have to be convicted.
Exactly.
Due process involves we charge you with a crime, and you're guilty, and then you pay whatever the penalty is. I get that, but that's not what's happening here.
Yeah. No. This is just they just don't like the they, like you said, they don't think environmental justice should be something that people focus on, and so they want their money back, which is
right.
A
you know
very
what?
dangerous
Pass a law. Don't fund it in the future. That's legal. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Enormous abuse. Let's talk about a couple other weird kinds of abuse. A lot of what's happened in America is because of a broken news ecosystem where propaganda has replaced a lot of news. I am seeing this impact, and I think you wrote about this too, where like Mr. Musk now controls an enormous amount of the media through X and through his ability to just go into the Oval Office and hold a press conference. And yet, if you are a government employee, you can't even post something that your cousin will read because you're terrified of surveillance and the backlash that's happening. That also creates an enormous risk.
I mean, there is right now a chilling effect, where people are worried about what can they say, what can they not say, will they be punished? I don't know if you saw, but they set out a list of things you're not allowed to teach at the Naval Academy. It's unclear exactly what, there was something like things that have to do with structural racism or sexism. And so what does that mean? And what if you're a faculty member there, what are you allowed to have in your syllabi and not? We've already seen these kinds of things, these laws passed in Florida. And we know that then it creates an environment where people are just scared to talk, and that's not healthy for a democracy.
Nope. Okay, so we have that, and the huge imbalance then because of the giant ability to talk on the other side. I got sort of one other thing. I think you were just in Europe. Am I right about that?
That's true. Yeah, I was. I was just in Spain.
So what's the reaction to America's, I want to say, unilateral effort to appease Putin, to lay claims on Greenland, to interfere in a German election, and to interfere on behalf of the new Nazi party? That's American policy now. What is Europe thinking about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think they're just stunned. I think they're stunned. They're paralyzed. I lived in Germany for about 5 years at different points in my life. And for most Germans, their image of America is still, the soldiers handing out candy when their cities were, in rubble. And there is just like especially for the older generations, it's like a undying commitment to the transatlantic relationship, to America. And when Vice President Vance yesterday, he gave this talk, which was really, breathtaking in the transformation. He was saying, the real threat to the U.S. and Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it is, people like Greta Thunberg. It's like the people that are, not allowing the AfD, which is this far-right extremist party, to be part of a governing coalition, and that party is really, it's not just like any other populist party that I don't know that there's this French far right party that Marine Le Pen runs, and she won't cooperate with this party because they're too extreme for her. It's that kind of a party. I think the New York Times headline was something like, Vance promotes party that has, I don't know, Nazi material, or, there's several of its members have been arrested for sharing Nazi material. And it's a really, when we think about, we should be talking about anti-Semitism and extremism in our society, it's really difficult to see the vice president then advocating that this is the party that should be part of the German government.
Well, I mean, it's breathtaking. It's stunningly inappropriate. It's contrary to all American values, but it also, since when is it okay for Americans to interfere in a foreign election? We don't want people doing that to us. Oh, wait, didn't they just get rid of all of the protections against foreign involvement in American elections? Didn't that also happen this week?
That I can neither confirm nor deny. I know there were some positions, different government positions that are about both cybersecurity and elections interference that have been eliminated.
Yep.
But I think just coming back to Europe for a second, the thing that is the continent really, they have such a positive and want America to succeed, and to be kind of dropped like a stone is really just, I can't really convey the cognitive jarring. I have these conversations with people who just felt just devastated by what's happening. And I really hope that Europe circles its wagons and stands up to the effort to sideline them in the conversation about Ukraine, because I think in order to have a Ukraine that is safe and secure, it's going to need somebody to step in, because I'm not very confident about what President Trump and Putin might decide.
Well, they've already told us that they've already told us they're not going to. President Trump is not going to support the effort to defend Ukraine. He's going to push for an end to hostilities in a way that guarantees that the whatever government survives in Ukraine can be undermined, and eventually a new puppet regime. We've seen that before with Russia. There's absolutely no reason not to think it's going to happen again. And that's not true. Europe is a reason to think it won't happen again. And I think Mr. Trump is mistaken if he thinks Europe is so weak that it won't defend itself.
Well, I think that is definitely what I'm hoping happens, is that Europe basically reinserts itself and says, we're not going to abide by that. We've done that before, and it only will lead to more people dying.
Yep. I'm talking with Professor Abraham Newman, who is at the School of Foreign Services at Georgetown University, a fabulous school, by the way. Professor, I in an earlier part of my life, helped set up and helped do the planning and a lot of the work in the early days of SFF in Doha.
No, really? Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah. So it's a part of my life that I'm proud of, and the association with that school means a lot to me.
Oh, wonderful. That's great to hear.
Yeah. All right. So we've covered a few things, and I just want to go back over them. So there's plumbing. The plumbing is underlies our ability to have all the economic transactions of our government, all the personnel in our government, all the personnel records, all of the medical records of basically everyone in America because of Medicare and Medicaid and the reimbursements to hospitals. All of the contracts and the bids for contracts that everybody puts in to get to work with the federal government. And now an entity, Mr. Musk and Mr. Musk and the Doge Group, not elected by Americans, not really accountable to any part of the government, now controls all of that, and has done so in ways that experts say are sloppy about cybersecurity and other things. Why isn't this like the 50 alarm fire that everyone is worried about?
Well, I think it should be, and I keep trying to, I'm really happy for this conversation just to bring it to people's attention. I think the problem is that the government is sanctioning it. In Congress, the majority in Congress, the Republicans, they don't want accountability for this. And so they're letting it happen. If there was a check on the executive, Congress could intervene. They could call Musk for, a hearing and say, what are you doing? They could, say, let's see the work authorizations of these people. Do they have security clearance? But unfortunately, you've had several statements from senior Republicans basically just saying, well, this is fine with me. So it's very difficult from inside the government to put a check on this. The one thing that has happened is there have been a series of courts that have, ruled these different temporary restraining orders. And I think the problem is that it's like a shell game where every time the court rules you can't have access to this, then a Doge moves. And, it's like there was a very tricky one where it was like you could have read-only access. And then it was kind of like, well, what does that really mean, read-only access? It's like it becomes a kind of like a shell game. And so I think that becomes very difficult, and they keep moving from one agency to another. So now it's the Department of Education and your student loan information. And so you basically have to do whack-a-mole with these kinds of court judgments.
Right. And the judicial system is holding, thank goodness. Not clear whether the executive branch will continue, but they have mostly honored what the judicial system has put out there, mostly. But Congress has to do its job.
Yeah, and I do encourage people to mobilize their consumer power. It's like banks, if the government can really, without due process, reach into banks and take back funds, I mean, that's I'm worried about it. What I want my bank to say, no, I have a system in place that's going to protect you. I will, unless there is a subpoena or there's some kind of legal finding, I'm not going to just give money back. So I think everybody should be calling their banks and demanding, what's your plan? This is a unique situation.
That's absolutely right. If you get Social Security, call your bank. Right? If you've gotten a reimbursement for Medicare or Medicaid, call your bank, because you can't have them just say, yeah, you know what, I'm taking it out of your account, giving it back to Mr. Musk. Yeah,
exactly.
All right, well, that's where we have to end. That's where we have to end this conversation, because we're run out of time. If you don't mind, let's do this again in a month or so, and because I'm sure we will have a much clearer picture of where we are.
Sounds good. And thanks again, Edwin. This is a great conversation.
Yep. Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Okay.
Okay, everybody, we're going to take a break, and when I come back, your comments.
Edwin Eisendrath is taking your calls now at 773-763-9278. The Big Picture is on now. WCPT 820.
Brian, kick us off.
Good afternoon, Edwin. How are you?
Thank you. Good.
Good. Well, this whole business of Project 2025 and what Trump and Musk are doing, and what they want to do with Social Security, Medicare and Medicaid and other things, all kinds of other things, to me, bears similarities to what the Republicans wanted to do in the mid-'90s with Newt Gingrich and the contract on America. Do you see it that way? Because they seemed that they wanted a libertarian society.
I don't see it that way. There are similarities, but I think the policy fights are the least important ones right now. Their policies are kind of all over the map. I mean, Newt Gingrich and those guys back then wouldn't have sold out Ukraine, wouldn't have wanted a Nazi party in Germany. You know, I think there's some really weird sui generis things going on right now. And the biggest threats are the ones that my last guest talked about, where the systems of the government are just being handed over to somebody outside the government. Newt Gingrich and his crowd wanted a different set of policies, and I didn't like any of them, to be clear.
Libertarian.
Well, and cruel. I mean, I remember him saying if you got food stamps, you couldn't use them to buy diapers for your children if you needed them. I mean, he was just cruel. Right. And that part stays the same. I agree with that. That cruelty is still with us. But I don't believe it was libertarian back then. I don't believe it is now, because it really isn't about government getting off our backs. It's about government being in the pocket of the most powerful interest in the country and using that power against the people. And that's not libertarian, that's greedy. And that was what Gingrich was for, and that is still out there.
Well, thank you for taking my call, Edwin, and you have a
As
wonderful
always,
weekend.
You too. Really appreciate it. Jim, you're next.
Hi, Edwin. I was so happy to hear that they found a replacement at the Kennedy Center for Renee Fleming. I guess Lauren Boebert's going to take the part. And this spring, they're kind of planning to open up the play. Peter Keel's going to open up Springtime for Hitler for the first play at the Kennedy Center from the producers.
Yeah, but not as a farce, but as reality.
No, it's reality. It's complete reality. Well, then we'll have, we'll have the other Afrikaner. He can dress up in full regalia, full Nazi regalia. So he doesn't have to fake it, because he can say that it's fake news if anybody says that, they're trying to, what you see is not reality. What we tell you is reality. I mean, Edwin, seriously, did you ever think that you live in a time when no one can they're going to define reality? They're going to define reality.
Well, they've been doing it for a while.
But remember that. Anyway, I know. Jim, it's insanity. Yeah. Go ahead.
That's what changed my life. I mean, I had been out of politics and out of this world, and I was I was living a business career. I was overseas. I was doing, good work, paying, for my family, doing what a lot of people do. When Donald Trump won the first time, and he won because we no longer had a shared sense of reality, because he had polluted our ability to share truth so badly that I came back here all these years ago and have dedicated the rest of my life to this fight. So you're right on the topic that we no longer share a sense of truth. It's frightening and terrifying.
Remember this. Reason has no authority. I mean, Socrates had to commit suicide over it. Reason has no authority. Reason exists because, in my opinion, it's a God-given element of the human being. But there's no authority over reason. I mean, so anybody who thinks that they can manipulate reason or become a dictator, because it doesn't last long. You're a student of history, Edwin. I mean, it lasts temporarily. It lasted in Spain. It lasts when you guys suffer under it. You suffer under it. Everybody suffers under it. But as far as a 1,000-year plan like Adolf had, no, that's not going to work. Edwin, this is nuts. Thank you, Edwin. Have a good week. Thank you.
You bet. I appreciate it. Let's see. David.
Hey, I'm still waiting for Eisendrath for mayor.
Well,
I know. You talk to your family.
We got some serious issues in Chicago for sure, but that's not where my focus is right now.
Okay. Well, down here, I love the fact that you're humble about it. But you know what? When you had that wonderful climate scientist, Catherine, and she was talking about percentages and numbers, one thing that I thought that was kind of not really fair was that when she, and you helped me with this, when she talked about how the Chinese are doing much more with solar panels than the United States is by huge percentages.
Yep.
I couldn't remember the number.
Oh, I don't have it in front of me. I'm sorry.
Okay, neither did I. But here's the thing that I wish that you would have talked about, because I don't think the Chinese are playing very fair, is that the United States has 216 coal-firing electric plants in the entire country. That's our grand total. Just in the last 2 years, the Chinese have made 140 coal-firing plants in China just in the last 2 years, and for the last 10 years, they've made at least another 350. So, the coal-burning plants are really what is going to cause carbon problems. And when we talk about what little drips and drabs of solar, is that the Chinese are not playing on a fair playing field, and I wish that that's something that she would have either brought up or said, look, if we're gonna be concerned about this, and heck, she even said that there's people she knows that are terrified by this. Is that, well, then let's work with all the numbers and not just some numbers. You know what I mean?
Well, she's making a different point. Her point wasn't that China isn't cheating on global trade. Her point wasn't that China doesn't cheat, isn't a polluter. China's one of the biggest polluters in the world, no question. She's just talking about the arc of what they're aiming to do. And they're aiming to have enough energy no matter what, and they'll get it by coal. They'll get it any way they can. But they are also investing enormously in trying. I mean, they're ahead of us on electric cars by a lot. And they're aiming to get ahead of us.
Have you seen the pictures? Have you seen the pictures on the internet of all the electric cars that are not selling in China? And there's these big fields of thousands and thousands of electric cars that nobody wants to buy, and they're sitting in fields. They're all white.
No. I get it. They don't have. Two things that we have. First, they're suffering from a bit of an economic downturn, which leaves cars unbought. But the other thing they don't have is a real market economy. And I'm a capitalist. I think capitalism requires that that it be the handmaiden of the democracy and work for this, work in a way that's regulated to protect people, not the other way around. But it does provide market information, and they don't have that in the same way we do. And so they do things like build. It's not just cars; they built cities worth of housing that's sitting empty in places. So I'm not saying, well, we need to trade places with China. That's not. I think we're in a better place than China for a lot of reasons. But they are investing in figuring out an energy future.
Catherine. Your guest, Catherine, talked about that she's a climate scientist, but then she says, I want to talk about it maybe in a holistic way that I wouldn't normally talk about when she talked about the psychology of it. And I thought, well, if you're going to talk about the psychology and the fear that people have, but let's talk about the fact that in 2 years, they're making 160 coal-firing plants when our entire country only has 216, and that blows away any kind of progress of solar by what is put into the atmosphere. And I wish that she would have talked about that.
Okay, fair point. Fair point. I take your point.
All right, I appreciate that. You're a good guy. All right, bye-bye.
All right, take care. Paul, you're next.
Yeah, hi, Edwin. Yeah, I in spirit and in response to Jim, I think Trump has replaced DEI with DUI. People like that on Facebook.
I get it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
governing under the influence. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what are we seeing here? I look at this and I wonder: is the Constitution being revealed as nothing more than the rules to a board game? I don't want to use the analogy not worth the paper it's printed on, but it doesn't. It is showing itself to have no peace, and it only works when people play nice in the sandbox, when everybody plays nice in the sandbox. And what worries me is the fact that there's no recourse. I mean, Congress can abdicate if there's the slightest majority. The Republicans have a slim majority, and yet Congress can abdicate its role. The courts, I think, okay, the federal courts for the time being have had some effectiveness, but the Supreme Court, that J.D. Vance has said that Trump should ignore or defy orders the Supreme Court, the way he tried to say, the same way Andrew Jackson did. But Andrew Jackson actually didn't really in terms of that case in 1832. But what I'm afraid of is not so much that Trump will defy Supreme Court orders. I think what will happen is, in order to avoid the humiliation and the literal degradation of the authority of the court, the Supreme Court will just find in his favor. Because if he does defy a Supreme Court order, that's game over. That means the courts have no authority, no credibility. And you have cited Federalist 78 many times, and all you have to do is read that paper, that Federalist paper, to see why. That if the president defies the Supreme Court, then anybody can. And
that's right. That's why Congress. That's why Congress would have to throw him out. There's also Federalist 51. When you and I are going to get into weeds here in a way that most listeners may not like, but Federalist 51 is about the balance of power between the branches and between the federal and state governments. And the brilliance of how this was set up is very enduring, but people have nibbled at it and tried to get an edge. And every democracy that's not true. The biggest democracies that have fallen and become totalitarian have fallen through legal means, not by being taken over militarily, but by legal means. And that is that we need to protect ourselves. And this week, my heroes are somebody who was a law clerk for Scalia, somebody who was a law clerk for John Roberts. They said, no, we are not going to weaponize the Justice Department for you to put a chain around the neck of Eric Adams. Either move forward and prosecute him as we should, or dismiss it, but to say, no, we're going to defer it to see if you will dance on this chain for us, is repulsive. And these Republicans stood up. And you know what? We're going to see this courage around the country. We're going to see it again and again and again, and until it is overwhelming, and we throw these terrible people out. Yeah, and the thing is that I think the Supreme Court paved the way for this kind of behavior with Donald Trump. I agree. How I feel about the Roberts Court. But again, they're not going to go along with the 14th Amendment stuff. They've written about it. They're not going to do that. Well, no, they're just not going to take the case. They'd like to, but that's okay. I won't get into the intricacies of that. But I mean that clause of the 14th Amendment. That's what makes everybody a citizen. I've asked people, are you, who support that? I say, are you a citizen? And they say, well, yeah. And I said, well, why? What makes you a citizen? And the first thing out of the mouth is, I was born here. Like, well, that's anything else. You don't have to say anything else. That's the end of the story. That's the only constitutional thing that makes you a citizen. And they don't really realize that. But okay, I guess the thing that's concerning me is that the wheels of government turn so slowly. Yet this fight that Trump and Musk are pulling is just brazen. They're breaking it at record pace, and it kind of reminds me of the balance between tort and regulation. I mean, tort is an after the fact grievance that you can recover in court for an injury. The problem with tort is, as we learned with things like exploding gas tanks on cars, is that when the injury is so severe, no tort is sufficient to repair the injury. So that's why government has to step in and pre-regulate so that things like that don't happen. And right now, the damage is being done so quickly. There is no tort, there is no reparation that can really, by the time it stops,
I fear that there's so much damage.
Well, I'm going to agree with you that they will do very serious damage. They have already done very serious damage, and they will do more terrible things to human beings and to our system. They will not last. We will outlast them, and then we will have to spend time recovering. And it won't be time spent just moving forward. We actually have to recover from the damage they've done, but we will. But I'm not going to pretend that they aren't going to cause real and lasting damage. These are terrible, terrible people. They're crooks. They want to steal everything, and they do not care about the American people.
Yeah.
Anyway, Paul, it's always great talking to you. Take care.
Thanks, okay. Yeah.
Yep. Earl, I'm going to take you and then Brenda, and then I think we're going to be done. So, Brenda, hang on. You're next. Earl, right now.
Hey, thank you for taking my call. And what I want to say is that I'm not as magnanimous toward the Republicans who don't identify with MAGA. They still vote Republicans, and they put in MAGA to run the country. And I, as a black man, that's completely terrifying to me. Trump's not an open arm, kind of welcoming kind of guy to people of color. I know about the 400 years of suffering that my people have had here in the country. And I think that with this group in the White House and the toughness of the people in the Senate and in the House that are going along with their programs, the detriment is going to be very serious and very hurtful. And it could be retrograde. And I, as an older black man, don't have the luxury of saying that we're going to wait them out.
Yeah.
So,
Earl, I couldn't agree with you more.
The point I was trying to make was that I don't have that luxury. Whatever damage that they do, it's not going to be permanent. But for me, it'll be permanent because it'll be here for the rest of my life.
I agree with you. And the idea that the United States government thinks that it is subversive and dangerous and now illegal to teach the history of the Tuskegee Airmen is so disgusting and vile that they don't know whether it's okay to talk about slavery and whether or not that even having that discussion will be legal in American schools, and they don't know if that's going to be legal. I'm sorry. Guess what? We are going to talk about the Tuskegee Airmen. We are going to talk about the facts of slavery and its legacy in America, and there is nothing they can do to shut us up. But the fact that they're trying, Earl, is as disgusting as anything I've seen since, I don't know, Bull Connor unleashed those dogs.
No, I agree with you. And the last thing I'm going to throw in there, then I'm going to jump off is, I don't understand why women in America aren't up in arms in the street in full mass because of this new initiative where they're saying that women should have to be shown that they have applied for a name change in order to vote. If they didn't, when they changed the name to their husband's, when they took their husband's last name. I don't understand why women are not,
because they don't believe it, Earl.
Up in arms about that.
They don't believe it.
All right,
they don't believe it.
I'm going to let you get to your last caller.
Yep. But you are absolutely right. When they pass the SAVE Act, women all over the country are going to be told they're not allowed to vote. And they're going to be plenty surprised when it happens, but it'll get them through another election. It's absolutely awful. Brenda, you are my last call for the day. I hope it's a good one.
Hey, Edwin. Thank you for taking my call, and I just want you to know I love your show. I have a rhetorical question. I'll make it quick. My rhetorical question is, do Democrats really want to win, or do they just want to stand for all the perfect principles? And the reason I ask that is, now, I do have educational credentials. I have a law degree. I've practiced law. I've taught history at a local four-year college, and I'm also a nurse. So I'm not stupid, but I'm also not so hyper intellectual that I can't relate to the common person. I pride myself on being able to, even though obviously I think I have some intelligence and some academic credentials, I want to relate to my neighbors, my family, my fellow church members, etc. So here's two things that I think have been missing. One, and you're going to probably scoff at this, one is charisma. And unfortunately, the reality is to win, I think, in America, there has to be charisma. And then secondly, I think the principles cannot be so extreme that you're cutting out a lot of ordinary, everyday people. I think we need a little bit more moderation. And I realize that might sound very unpopular to a lot of progressives in the party. I myself volunteered with the campaign. I'm very good. I'll doggedly knock on doors, hand things out, hang up signs. But I was sort of shunned a little bit, and I felt it because maybe I'm not 100% in line with every single thing they stand for. And this goes to, I heard you talking about this earlier with one of the guests. Is there room for me in your party, Edwin, if I don't embrace 100% of everything, but maybe I only embrace 90%?
Yes, the answer is emphatically yes. And there's got to be people in it who you think are wrong 10% of the time, that you'll let be in the party with you. We have to decide that we love each other. We can disagree with each other, but we don't hate each other. And the party and the movement to save America is big enough so that we don't have to shun each other as we move forward. Very important. I think that's a lesson that we are learning, and we have learned it. That doesn't mean there are people on, we do it less than the other guys. I mean, to try and be a Republican who doesn't want to just suck up to Donald Trump these days, you're gone. So we have a bigger tent. It needs to be a happier tent where we all like to see more people in it, because that's what the stakes are. So that is going to be our last word, I'm afraid. Thank you all for sticking with me for 3 hours on this, what is a chilly day up here in Chicago. And I look forward to talking to you again next week as we see another week of outrages, but also another week of, doing what we can to push back and lifting the bar.